Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, where on earth is this wretched inn? I'm really struggling to find it, my grandmother said. She was looking increasingly frustrated. We had left the bustling town of Dawson City long behind us, and were now deep in the heart of the Yukon countryside, looking for an inn or guest house, if you like, called the Whistling Willows Inn, which had been a guest house or inn in this part of the world since the gold rush, which occurred between the years of 1896 to 1899, and it was said that over $29 million of gold was pulled out of the ground here, which was why Dawson City became known as the Paris of the North. It was the largest city west of Winnipeg and north of Seattle. It would seem that back in the days of the gold rush, overnight millionaires roamed the streets looking for an opportunity to spend their newly acquired wealth. It was the time when Queen Victoria was reigning on the British throne, and in Dawson City the upbeat vibe of this bustling city was like nothing the people of the time had ever known before, for people came from far and wide to this part of the world with big dreams and aspirations of gaining great wealth, and many people certainly acquired their dreams, while others left the city with empty pockets, their hopes of getting rich quickly seriously now dashed. According to my grandmother, Gretchen Barlow, the Whispering Willows Inn had been reopened in the early 2000s by the current owner, a man called Patrick Menenges. It had once again become a thriving guest house, or inn if you like, run by a caretaker called Ella Jones, who Patrick personally appointed to oversee all the guests on their arrival at the inn, where he'd also recruited other staff to care for the quintessential needs of all his guests. So staying at the Whistling Willows Inn, just like in its heyday, certainly did not come cheap. My grandmother told me that she'd read a magazine article all about the owner, Patrick Menenges, that was published in 2003. She informed me he was a successful businessman who came from a wealthy, highly esteemed background, and he was the person responsible for bringing the old inn back to life so that it looked as magnificent as it had done in the 1800s. Patrick Menenges claimed he had stumbled upon the Whistling Willows Inn quite by chance. It was in the year 2000 that I fortuitously stumbled across the derelict inn, lying in a state of disrepair and sorry neglect, he told the magazine. He went on to explain that he had felt a sudden impulsive urge to rescue this Victorian property from its crumbling demise from the very first moment he had laid eyes on the place. It would seem Patrick Menenges had been driving down a sequestered country road, carpeted in thick layers of freshly formed snow in the Yukon countryside, where he was earnestly looking for a Pacific address whereupon he could pick up a real Christmas tree for his wife Angeline, who was most insistent that she was tired of fake Christmas trees and wanted a real one in the house that year, even if it did mean getting pine needles all over the place, which for her was a small price to pay for having the real thing in their living room. "We're having Cheryl's family around for Christmas," she informed her husband. Cheryl was her sister. "I want to celebrate Christmas this year in great style, and I certainly do not want anything fake lying around our house. Everything must be real and authentic, from the red poinsettias to, of course, the holly and the Christmas tree. I know my sister Cheryl has an extreme aversion to all things fake, and I can understand where she's coming from in that regard. I want to make this a Christmas to remember for the all of us, as we don't get the opportunity to spend Christmas with Cheryl's family very often. Make sure you choose the best Christmas tree you can find, Patrick. I want it to be perfect, and I don't want you letting me down on this. I want that tree to look spectacular in our living room, so that when Cheryl's family arrive here for Christmas, they'll feel warmly welcome in our abode." Patrick had grumbled, feeling a tad annoyed that his wife Angeline had asked him to select the perfect Christmas tree, because when push came to shove, what did that actually mean? A tree was a tree as far as Patrick Menenges was concerned. "I really wish you would come with me, love," he mumbled. "How will I know if I'm picking the right Christmas tree for you? I know from bitter experience how pedantically fussy you can be at times about the smallest details." "Are you kidding me?" Angeline had moaned. "I've got 101 things to do, Patrick. Cheryl and her family will be arriving here in 3 days' time. Can't you see I've got my hands full? I'm making the Christmas puddings today, if you must know. And I haven't got the time to go traipsing around the countryside looking for this Christmas tree farm. I was hoping, rather optimistically, Patrick, it would seem, that I could delegate this responsibility to you. It would be a load off my mind. I mean, how difficult can it be for you to choose a decent tree that would be suitable to decorate and would look good in our living room? It's not exactly rocket science, is it? A good tree, as far as I'm concerned, is a good tree." "That may be true, love," Patrick conceded, "but I don't think any tree I pick will be good enough for you." "Oh, honestly, is this your feeble excuse to shiver me along to come with you? Because it's not going to work. I'm sure I can trust you to pick out a good tree, Patrick." Patrick grumbled under his breath, reassuring his wife Angeline that he would do his best to find her a good tree. He ventured out in his Land Rover Discovery in the blistering cold weather. It was snowing quite heavily, and everywhere Patrick looked, icicles clung to evergreen trees. And in this seemingly magnificent winter wonderland, one landmark tended to look much the same as another, and Patrick knew it would be terribly easy to get lost navigating this treacherous tangle of roads, rather like being stuck in a maze of cornfields where you can never find the end from the beginning. Patrick almost felt as if he'd been driving around in circles, as he couldn't find the sign for the place that was supposed to sell Christmas trees, which he had been told by his wife was clearly marked. "My foot," he thought, "nothing is marked around here. What is Angeline talking about? Clearly marked? What nonsense! Where is this damned Christmas tree farm?" he wondered. It was so typical of his wife Angeline to send him on a wild goose chase like this, like she did the previous Christmas, insisting he returned home with a live turkey, because she didn't want to buy a turkey from the local store. Fresh was so much better. He'd faithfully done as she had asked. But that turkey fortunately escaped the butcher's knife, and he never got to kill the bugger, because Angeline grew attached to the ugly gobbler, who she now called Percival, and they kept him as a rather bizarre kind of pet. And the bird waddled around the backyard to his heart's content, not realizing how lucky he was to be alive. His wife had developed a strange affection for the turkey, to such an extent that she was refusing to eat turkey ever again, and to ever serve it for Thanksgiving or Christmas, so goose was now strictly on the menu. "I cannot eat turkey ever again," she had told Patrick. "Percival is around, and it would be like eating one of his friends, and how could I do that to him? He'd feel very hurt by that." Patrick soon found himself turning down a long road to the right. fringed by tall, lofty trees, all covered in snow. That was when he came upon some distinguished wrought iron gates that had been left wide open, which was a bit of good luck. He suspected that the long driveway through these affluent-looking gates must lead to a house, and possibly someone would be at home who would be able to direct him to the Christmas tree farm. For the last thing Patrick wanted to do was to return home empty-handed and face the wrath of his wife Angeline, who had a propensity to be formidable at the very best of times. The driveway opened up into a wide area that was heavily covered in snow, but Patrick suspected during the summer the place would be a maze of weeds and creepers, and that was when he saw it. Patrick slammed down his brakes so hard that his Land Rover jerked to a sudden, rather violent stop. Patrick gawked at the sight before his very eyes, almost as if his eyes were standing up on stalks, for nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing now. The house he approached was unoccupied. It had been left empty for a long time, he thought. It was an old, abandoned Victoria manor house. There could have been at one time affluently grandiose, but now it looked completely washed out and faded, rather like a sick woman of regal status and notoriety, hanging on to life by a very fine silver thread that was so desperately fragile it could snap in any second. He realized to his astonishment this once very distinguished-looking Victorian residence, which was substantial in size, was no longer what it had once been in its prime. Patrick suddenly observed a rusty old sign set up against a tall tree that read the Whispering Willows Inn, so he realized that this place was probably open for business in the days of the gold rush to an elite, very upmarket clientele, but it seemed like it had long since been abandoned and left to sadly descend into rampant decay. Patrick felt a tugging at his heartstrings, and tears glistened in his eyes as he stared at this once glorious house, so steeped in a rich, vibrant and colourful history, that now looked so lugubriously sorrowful, so forlorn, so sorrowfully lost, as if the house itself sensed its days of glory were long since over. "Not if I've got anything to do with it," Patrick thought to himself. The house, although in a bad state, had undeniable charm and character, that it certainly didn't deserve to be wiped away from our existence, like the writing on a teacher's blackboard. This place was oozing with so much potential. It had been so tragically forgotten and forsaken, like an old gravesite, that nobody bothered to visit any more. Patrick Menenges felt an incongruous, inexplicable anger welling up inside his gut towards the current owner of the property, who had failed abysmally in fixing the place up and preserving its magnificent heritage. Moments later, Patrick reasoned with himself that the owner of the property might not have the money needed to invest in doing up the historic residence. Patrick didn't want to be quick to rush into judgment, as fixing up a property such as this would certainly attack the purse strings and cost a whole heap of money, but money he believed was well worth spending, for this house deserved a second chance at life. All of a sudden, Patrick was overcome with a prickling sensation of electricity coming all over him, almost like an electric shock, as if he'd put his entire body into an electric socket. It was almost as if the Victorian Inn was reaching out to Patrick, he told the magazine. "It was as if it was begging me to lift it out of its melancholia," he explained. "I don't think it was an accident that I stumbled across the place. It was almost as if I'd been divinely led down the road here by an invisible pair of hands. I knew in that quintessential moment I had to buy the old Victorian Inn and fix it up. It wasn't a question in my mind whether I should do it or not. It was a matter of I had to do it, and nothing on this earth was going to stop me, come what may. The fearsome urge within me to renovate this old Victorian Inn was overwhelming, like an itch I had to scratch, that I couldn't possibly ignore, or otherwise it would drive me completely bonkers. Such was my devotion to fix up the place. Needless to say, I got back in my Land Rover and returned home. And surprisingly, on the return journey, I found it relatively easy to find my way back home. I greeted my wife Angeline with a broad grin on my face, forgetting all about the errand she had sent me on, and the Christmas tree that she had expected me to pick up for her from the Christmas tree farm. My wife looked delighted to see me when I returned to the house, as judging by the self-satisfied, rather animated expression I was wearing on my face, she falsely assumed that I had found for her the perfect Christmas tree to grace our living room with. "Oh, you're back already! That is good news. It's been snowing down so heavily. I thought you'd take your time getting back. Where is the tree?" she asked me, looking at me somewhat nonplussed, as I had brought nothing with me into the house, apart from my car keys, of course, which I casually threw down on the hall table along with my gloves. And, of course, I continued to wear a great big smile on my face that refused to leave me, and it gave me the look of a simpleton, I am sure. "Well, where is the tree?" my wife repeated. "Is it in the trunk of your car? It would be nice if you'd bring it in, Patrick, and set it up in the living room for me." Patrick stared at his wife with wide, excited eyes. He hadn't listened to a word his wife was saying, and her eager inquiries about the tree he barely heard. He was lost in his wistfully dreamy thoughts about the Victorian house he had just seen, and imagining how magnificent it would look once it was renovated. He then said to his wife, "It's so beautiful. I'm going to make it my personal project. I'm going to get it done up so it will look absolutely incredible." When he said this, he was, of course, referring to the old Victorian property he'd just encountered. But his wife, Angeline, thought he was referring to the Christmas tree, and what he had just said left her far from amused. "Don't be silly, Patrick. I'm not going to let you anywhere near that Christmas tree. If you decorate it, I'm quite sure it'll look as if it is decorated by a toddler. I'm not being mean to you, love, but you have no artistic prowess whatsoever. I don't understand why you're suddenly so fixated about decorating my tree. This is not like you at all. I'm sorry, but you're not going to decorate it. I'm overseeing all that myself, thank you very much." "I wasn't talking about the Christmas tree, love. I was talking about something so much more significant," said Patrick excitedly, his bright eyes lighting up like two live wires of electricity. "Would you believe it? I took a wrong turning in the road. The trouble is, when everything is snowing down so hard, it's difficult to see the wood from the trees. And I got lost looking for that damned Christmas tree farm. But thankfully it wasn't a wasted journey, because the good news is, quite by chance I stumbled upon an old Victorian home that has been left in a dreadful state of neglect. It was an inn once, a thriving inn, I'm sure, but I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to buy the place once I find out who the owner is, of course." At this impulsive random confession, Patrick's wife looked incensed. "For goodness sake, Patrick, I'm talking about the Christmas tree you were supposed to pick up for me, not some strange Victorian house you encountered on your intrepid excursion in the car. Where is the Christmas tree you were supposed to pick up for me?" Her eyes widened as worry lines wrinkled her brow. "Please God, Patrick, don't tell me you didn't pick up my tree for me. You didn't, did you?" "Sorry, love. I got lost. I couldn't find the Christmas tree farm anywhere, but I did find this abandoned Victorian house, and I'm going to fix it up. Isn't that great, great news?" At this, Patrick's wife looked even more angry. She put her hands defiantly on her hips, and if looks could kill, she was wearing that look. Patrick's wife's voice was so enraged that she spoke to him almost in a muted whisper, as if her throat had suddenly become incredibly scratchy. "I ask you to do one little chore for me, Patrick. Just one tiny little chore," she said. "And all you do is harp on about an old Victorian property. You are the end, Patrick. You hear it? The end. I'm sick to death of the way you're always so damn distracted by something that grabs your interest. You're like a little boy in a candy store, getting seduced by a bottle of licorice twists. It's ridiculous. I cannot trust you, Patrick, to do one straightforward, simple chore for me, without you getting sidetracked in some way. This is so typical of you. I might as well go and get that tree myself. You are completely useless and totally incompetent," she said. Moments later she grabbed her own car keys and stormed out of the house belligerently, looking less than amused, as she furiously started up the engine of her car and drove through the thick snow at an accelerated pace. Patrick didn't care about his wife's belligerence, or about his failings that day, for in his eyes he had found the jewel in the crown, which he intended to restore back to its former glory. Christmas came and went that year, and Patrick barely noticed all the exciting festivities, or even the beautiful watch his wife had bought him, because he was caught up in his own bubble. Even Angeline's own sister commented over Christmas that Patrick appeared to be locked up in his own world. It was after Christmas that Patrick immediately did his level best to find out who the current owner of the Whispering Willows Inn was, as he was determined to offer the owner a price he would not be able to refuse, as come hell or high water, Patrick was going to buy that Victorian property, and he was certainly glad he had the means to do so. Patrick went on to admit to the magazine that in his ambitious endeavours to bring the sad Victorian inn back to life again, it had consumed him with a burning, unbridled passion, and very nearly succeeded in ripping his relationship with his wife Angeline apart. Sadly, Angeline could not relate to his obsession with the property, and likened his passion to the house to a little boy being addicted to his toy train set. It would seem on 2 occasions Angeline threatened Patrick with divorce, asking him to choose between her and the Victorian house. But luckily in the end the trepidation in their relationship settled, and all this talk about divorce finally dissipated. Patrick chuckled as he told the magazine, "In the end, my wife Angeline finally saw sense. She realized she had it good with me, and she wasn't about to throw a good thing away. No one, not even her, could say anything to discourage me with my ambitions for the Victorian property. It goes without saying that Angeline thought I had lost leave of my senses in buying the ramshackle place, but I knew I'd brought a diamond in the rough. Indeed, my wife Angeline relentlessly discouraged me from getting embroiled in what she assumed would be a daunting project, which she thought would be a money trap that would swallow up a lot of our money. But I ignored her willful protestations, for sometimes a man's got to do what a man's got to do, and nothing will stop him. That was me, I'm afraid. At the time I contacted the owner of the Whistling Willows Inn. It turned out he'd held on to the old place for many long years, as it had been passed down to his family line through generations. Lennon Pritchard had inherited the property from his grandfather, who had wanted him to preserve the place, so he held on to it, in the vain hope that one day he'd be able to do it up, if he came into a sizable amount of money, that is. When I told him I intended to bring the property back to its former glory, and turn it into an inn again, just like in its old glory days, it would seem my tempting offer he could not refuse. He told me he intrinsically believed it would be an absolute offence to let the old Victorian house be taken down by a bulldozer, and I assured him that that would never happen under my watch. He said he believed in his gut that his grandfather from beyond the grave had directed me into finding the property, and I don't doubt that for a second, for my obsession to do up the old inn was not natural by any manner of means, for I have never known myself to be this fixated over anything before. Of course, it goes without saying that I was even advised by the building surveyor to tear the inn down and start again, but I refused to do that. I guess you could say on the day when I serendipitously discovered the old inn, I could see the potential of the place, although most people, I guess, would have seen the chaos, for it was falling apart. Paint had peeled off the walls, burgeoning creepers had cruelly trespassed across every wall, like a winding ball of your grandmother's wool, that gets all knotted up and twisted and suffocates everything in its watch, so that everything gets ensnared inside of it. Ostensibly, I believe, only a keen eye could observe the underlying character and charm of the Whistling Willows Inn. Let's not kid, the place was an absolute mess. Windows were fractured and broken, rot, mould and damp had set in, and wood was being eaten alive by hungry termites, and we all know the devastation termites leave behind them. I'm afraid to say that the Whispering Willows Inn had become a free-for-all buffet for all kinds of wildlife, from rats to cockroaches, rodents and termites, that had moved in once the owners had finally moved out. I knew that even amidst all this chaotic upheaval, this Victorian property had structurally very good bones, and with a bit of tender loving care, it could be resurrected from the dead and brought back to life, rather like an old Victorian painting that has gathered so much dirt over the years that you can barely see the picture at all. But once it's cleaned, you can see how magnificently beautiful that painting actually once was, as all the colours come to life. It would be the same for the manor house, I rather suspected. I found out through my lengthy research that the Whispering Willows Inn had been a thriving inn in the days of the gold rush, for a rather exclusive elite clientele, you could say, where well-to-do people who had suddenly got rich and enjoyed spending a few days away from Dawson City would come to stay for the weekend, enjoying delicious food created by the in-house chef, or being pampered by the staff within an inch of their lives, and indulging themselves in all kind of pleasurable, rather frivolous pastimes, from playing charades in the living room to pass the slipper on a cold winter's evening, seated by a crackling fire in the living room, or enjoying all kinds of outdoor pursuits during the day, of which I'm quite sure there were many for the Victorians. Suffice to say, when my workers were restoring the old inn, they did experience some strange paranormal activity, Patrick informed the magazine. I mean, of course, I do understand, when you're fixing up an old place, steeped in a rich, colourful history, you can easily stir up paranormal activity, and I guess that's what happened here. One of my workers, a man called Sam Forrester, told me a rather outlandish story that I couldn't fathom. It certainly made me sit back and take notice, and think a little bit about the unseen world. Sam Forrester is a very reliable man, very trustworthy in every regard. He told me when he was fixing some of the panelling in the wooden floors, he suddenly became incredibly cold, as if a draught of icy air had entered the room. He felt this whoosh of energy going past him, and he could hear the rustle of what sounded like a long skirt brushing against the floor. The strange experience made his skin prickle, almost as if someone had just walked over his grave. Sam, as you can imagine, felt disquieted by this outlandish, very bizarre experience. He felt certain someone was watching him, so he looked up, but nothing was there. He shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly and continued with his job, wondering if his imagination was playing tricks on him. The next moment he nearly jumped right out of his skin. Someone was touching his shoulders with icy cold hands that made him shiver. He looked up to see an attractive woman standing there. He said she was wearing a stunning-looking Victorian dress and was looking at Sam intently. He described her as being so real it was almost impossible to believe she could be a ghost, and at first it never occurred to him that she actually was. There was nothing remotely translucent about her. She was as solid as you and me, and my first thought was she was an eccentric young lady who liked to dress old-fashioned. But if that were indeed the case, where had she come from? Sam reasoned, for he hadn't heard any vehicles approaching the property. Sam asked the woman, "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked at him and said, "I was going to ask you the very same question. For what is a man of your leaning doing fixing the floors? Leave those jobs to the servants, will you? I don't expect any guest of mine to be doing manual work of any kind." Then she vanished in front of me, and I realized I'd seen a ghost. Let me tell you, it freaked me the hell out, but luckily I never saw the lady again. Sam told me that one of the men that work with him on the job had also seen the lady who was speaking to him, wearing the long dress, and had asked him who she was. He told her he didn't have a clue, because she'd been there 1 minute and gone the next. So they both concluded they must have seen an apparition that was connected to the old inn in some way. Sam went on to tell me that after his strange encounter with the woman, he researched the history of the inn I'd purchased, and learnt that a woman called Charlotte Pritchard, formerly known as Charlotte Lewis, had run the inn for her uncle for many, many years, with her husband at her side. Sam saw a photograph of the inn that was taken in the 1800s. There was a woman with her husband standing outside the inn. And, of course, the photograph was marked Charlotte Pritchard, and, of course, her husband, Mr. Pritchard. And my workman realized that this was the ghostly woman he'd seen on the day that he encountered that ghostly apparition while he was fixing the floorboards. So the photograph almost certainly confirmed to him that he and his friend had seen a ghost. Patrick informed the magazine that while the renovations were taking place to the old inn, the paranormal activity escalated for weeks at a time. Workmen would find their tools going missing, ending up in the most peculiar of places, I believe. Sometimes they claimed to have heard disembodied whispers and giggling, and one workman heard a very distinctive male voice saying, "Are you coming or not? We're going to ride the horses." My grandmother, whose name was Gretchen, had been fascinated by this article that she had read in the magazine, which she kept safely folded up in a diary for safekeeping. She had always favoured houses of history like this, and had a particular affinity with Victorian architecture. She had in mind that one day she would stay at the old inn, especially since it had been so beautifully restored by this gentleman, Patrick Menenges, and it would seem the stories of paranormal activity that was stirred up during the restoration project had inspired my grandmother still further. I knew that my grandmother always believed that there was more to this world than actually meets the eye, and that once we actually died, there was another world we would enter that was in a different dimension, so to speak. My grandmother's good friend, a woman called Maple Kitman, who had stayed at the Whistling Willows Inn for a few days with her own grandchildren, had told my grandmother that she had the most wonderful time at the inn, and it seemed her good report about the place had tickled my grandmother's resolve to go there. It was over a leisurely cup of tea in my grandmother's living room that Maple Kitman expressed her enthusiasm for the inn. "Well, I cannot praise the place enough. I mean, goodness gracious me, it was a struggle to find. But when we got there, I never regretted going there at all. The service we received was absolutely outstanding. Second to none, let me tell you. There was so much for my grandchildren to do, to keep them happily entertained all day long, which is what I wanted for them, of course. I mean, spoiling grandchildren is part of the pleasure of being a grandparent, don't you think, Gretchen?" "But of course you love spoiling your grandchildren," said my grandmother. "I do the same with mine. I love to spoil them. So tell me, what did you do at the inn? I've heard so much about the Whistling Willows Inn. I read a magazine article all about the place, you know." "Well, we did everything you can think of. We picnicked, we went horse riding, we rode ATVs, we went exploring and fishing. And goodness gracious me, I have to tell you, Gretchen, the food they served in the dining room, morning, noon and night, was excellent Victorian fare. The very best, let me tell you. The children loved the food." My grandmother went on to ask her friend if she or her grandchildren had experienced any paranormal activity during their stay at the Whistling Willows Inn. Maple Kitman had clutched her pearls tightly to her chest, looking quite shocked by my grandmother's question. She said, "Good Lord, no. Why do you ask me such things, Gretchen?" "Well, dear, as I was saying, I read an article about the old inn in a magazine. And apparently when it was being restored, a whole lot of paranormal activity was stirred up there. One of the workmen, a man called Sam Forrester, claimed to have seen the ghost of a woman who had charge over the inn during the 1800s. "Good Lord," said Maple Kitman, her face going as white as a piece of paper. "Well, if I had known that, Gretchen, I wouldn't have gone to stay at the old inn. I have no desire to stay somewhere where I might have an outer-worldly experience, and such things would almost certainly have terrified my grandchildren. My granddaughter Tessa can't even go to bed at night without sleeping with the light on. She's terrified of the dark. Had I known any of this that you speak of, I would certainly not have taken my grandchildren to stay at the old inn. Well, never mind, dear. Nothing happened when you were there, did it? Said my grandmother tactfully. Perhaps all the paranormal activity that they spoke about in the magazine died down once the house settled, which is often the case, you know, I believe. Mrs. Kitman thought about my grandmother's comments for a moment, but nervously still played with the pearls around her neck. She then said, What I would say, though, is you can definitely feel the history of the inn. And certainly if you love old Victorian houses, like I know you do, Gretchen, you will almost certainly love the place. You really should go with your grandchildren, Gretchen. That is, of course, if the paranormal activity you speak of has died down. Because let me tell you, they will have the time of their lives. It was the best thing I ever did, Gretchen, taking my grandchildren there to stay at the inn. They had the time of their lives. There's an excellent groomsman there in charge of the stables, and he will take your grandchildren riding down some of those amazingly beautiful trails. And then there's also a trampoline on the grounds, and my grandchildren would jump up and down on that trampoline at every given opportunity. They keep asking to go back to the place. That's what an impression it made upon them. So you really must go there. My grandmother considered what Maple Kitman had told her about the Whispering Willows Inn, and when my parents asked my grandmother to take charge of us for a couple of weeks while they went on a cruise liner together to celebrate my mother's 40th birthday, which she wanted to do in style, without her 2 whinging kids around, because yes, there were times she called me and my sister just that. My grandmother had told her she'd be delighted to take care of the both of us, and she had planned to take us on an adventure all of our own. But how lovely, my mother said. Where are you going to take the kids? If you don't mind my asking. Should I be jealous? She teased, raising one of her perfectly manicured eyebrows. You better be jealous, my dear, my grandmother had chuckled. I'm going to take both Scott and Eugenie to stay at an old inn that was around during the days of the gold rush. It was the kind of place that attracted a rather elite, prestigious clientele, so I'm told, because back in the day there were some filthy rich people roaming the streets of Dawson City, with so much wealth in their pockets they didn't know what to do with it. Goodness gracious me, said my mother. That must have been such a liberating feeling, to have all that money available. Tell me about this inn. It sounds quite charming. That is a perfect way to describe it, my grandmother agreed. The old inn, it's called Whispering Willows Inn, charming name, very Victorian, I suspect, was brought back to its former glory in the early 2000s by a man called Patrick Menenges. A friend of mine, a woman called Maple Kitman, recently stayed there with her 2 grandchildren. They had so much fun, I believe, at the old inn. They went riding and fishing in an idyllic country setting, and apparently there's a trampoline on the grounds that her grandchildren could not get enough of. But how perfectly delightful, my mother had said. It sounds like a wonderful place, Mother. You know I love places of history myself. But let's just say I don't think your adventure, as lovely as it may be, is going to rival our cruise across the Mediterranean. Nothing can beat that, I'm most sure. My grandmother had looked at my mother square in the face and said, Well, I think this adventure with my grandchildren is going to be one we will never forget. I've got a feeling about it, a gut feeling, you could say. My mother had chuckled. You and your feelings, Mum. Well, whatever. I do hope you thoroughly enjoy yourself with your grandchildren. And while you're out there watching the kids jumping on the trampoline, spare a little time of thinking of me and my husband, drinking cocktails on a luxurious deck of a sumptuously stylish cruise liner. Oh, I think, love, me and the grandchildren would be far too busy to spare you a passing thought, my grandmother had teased. Sadly, my grandfather, whom we called Falcon when he was alive, had died 2 years earlier, and was greatly missed by our entire family, most especially my grandmother, Gretchen Bradley. Since Falcon's passing, she had become quite melancholic, which was understandable, of course. I think it got quite lonely for her without Falcon being around, and for a long time she reflected very soulfully on the newspaper article she'd read in the magazine, which she kept safely tucked in that diary of hers, all about the Whispering Willows Inn, and of course about the renovations that had stirred up all kinds of paranormal activity there. I think my grandmother, after losing my grandfather so suddenly due to a massive stroke, really wanted to believe that there was so much more to this life, and that once she died that she would be reunited with my grandfather again on the other side. I remember she told me once that if a ghost materialized in front of her very eyes, that this would be confirmation for her that life did go on even after our deaths. My grandmother desperately wanted to believe that my grandfather Falcon was still very much around. She had claimed a couple of strange, rather bizarre things had happened to her after his death that made her emphatically believe that he was still watching her and was still very much around. One of the stories concerning my late grandfather revolved around a beautiful black and white cat he owned called Purdy. It was on a trip to church on a Sunday morning, when both my grandmother and grandfather had been making their way to the arched doors of the church, as all the parishioners were arriving for the Sunday service that morning. All of a sudden a mother cat darted up to my grandfather, running through the church shrubbery, carrying something in her mouth. She dropped a half-dead kitten at my grandfather's feet, as if to say, "Please help my baby." Then she'd hurriedly scuttled away to hide behind a bush, to see what my grandfather would do next, almost as if she was clandestinely hoping that my grandfather would rescue her little kitten, and he did just that. He picked up the kitten and took it straight to the emergency vet, where he'd been told that the kitten would be unlikely to make it and would probably die within hours, as it was so astonishingly weak. The kitten had been given intravenous fluids and antibiotics, and went on to make a full recovery that had astounded the vet to such an extent that he had said to my grandfather, "This is a cat that definitely wants to live. He certainly has 9 lives." Purdy became a much-loved member of my grandparents' home, even though in the beginning my grandmother was not all that fond of cats, as she had always preferred dogs, so she was surprised that Falcon had said he wanted to keep the cat and to call it Purdy. My grandmother would say, "If you want that cat, you better look after her yourself, as I don't intend to watch over her needs." In the end, my grandmother grew to love Purdy very much, in fact almost as much as my grandfather did, which really was saying something, because she didn't consider herself to be a cat person, but Purdy changed all that. Every morning my grandfather would put Purdy's collar on her, so that when she ventured out into the yard, the bell on her collar would ring, so that Purdy, who loved chasing birds and was a masterful huntress, would not have any success in her ambitious endeavours, and there would be no dead carcasses delivered to my grandfather later in the day. My grandfather would fastidiously remove Purdy's collar in the evening from her neck, but after he died, my grandmother failed to continue this practice, but on several occasions she noticed that Purdy was actually wearing her collar. She knew she hadn't put the collar on the cat, so who had done this? She marvelled at this strange conundrum. She hadn't bothered, one way or another, to really concern herself whether Purdy was wearing her collar or not, but my grandfather loved feeding the birds in the yard, and certainly didn't want Purdy harming any of his feathery friends, so he was punctilious about putting the collar on Purdy every morning. Another bizarre thing happened, and that was that my grandmother could not find her wedding band anywhere, and she was very upset about this, because it had mysteriously disappeared. But then, against all the odds, she found the wedding band fitted on Purdy's collar, next to the bell, which was extraordinary. She began to think that maybe her husband Falcon was communicating to her from beyond the grave, because who had put the ring on Purdy's collar? This was an enigmatic mystery my grandmother could not explain. My mother, who was naturally a deeply cynical person, especially about such outlandish happenings, suggested to my grandmother that she had put the ring on Purdy's collar herself, without even realizing she had done it, in a moment of absent-mindedness. "But why would I do a thing like that?" my grandmother had protested, to which my mother replied, "Well, we all do stupid things, don't we? when a loved one passes away. My grandmother had shrugged her shoulders and said, "Let's be clear, sweetheart. Why would I ever put my wedding band on the cat's collar? I turned this whole house upside down looking for it, and then I found it in the most obscure place. Apart from anything else, I haven't been the one putting Purdy's collar on her. It's mysteriously appeared on her neck over the last few mornings. How can you explain that? I'm quite sure it's Falcon, telling me he's still very much around." "Look, Mum," my mother had said, "I know how much you love Dad and how sad you are about his passing. But you've got to live in the real world. You can't be in denial like this. A dead person cannot put a collar on Purdy, nor can they put a wedding band on Purdy's collar. If you didn't put it there, who did? It certainly wasn't Dad. He is dead." "How do you know it wasn't your father?" my grandmother had protested. "What do you even know about the dead?" "I know, Mum. I know enough. I know when you're dead, you're gone. You can't intercede in your loved one's life anymore. And as for putting on collars, give me a break. You probably did that yourself. I'm not saying you did it purposely, with a conscience, or an awareness even, but you did so nevertheless. Maybe you so wanted to believe Dad was communicating with you. So you did this to feel comforted. It's perfectly understandable, Mum." At that, my grandmother never spoke about the subject to my mother again. I mean, what was the point? My mother didn't believe in anything outer-worldly, and her mind was as closed as the door on a hamster's cage. When I learnt that me and my sister were going to spend a few days in the countryside with my grandmother, staying at an old inn, known as the Whispering Willows Inn, that had been restored to its former glory, me and my sister Eugenie were, dare I say, reasonably excited, for we thoroughly liked the idea of jumping up and down on a trampoline on the grounds and going horse riding in the countryside. Well, it didn't get better than that, did it? And besides, it would be great fun to spend some time with our grandmother, whom we both adored. My grandmother was a wise woman, with a fabulous sense of humour, and not many people made us laugh as much as she did. And what made her even better was that my grandmother was such a childlike person in her heart. She would play with us in the way that other adults never would, and she really knew how to relate to children. So there we were, stuck in a rental car on our trip, trying to find the mysterious whereabouts of the Whispering Willows Inn. Where was it, was the number 101 question. My grandmother had obstinately refused to use a GPS. She was used to doing things the old-fashioned way. So I was seated next to her on the passenger side seat, with a map spread out on my lap, wondering why my grandmother refused to embrace technology of any kind, and why she was so dubiously suspicious of all the latest modern innovations. She barely ever used the cell phone my mother had purchased for her. When she did so with a wary scepticism, which meant my mother was always tirelessly complaining that my grandmother failed to answer her calls. But my grandmother claimed that she didn't like a cell phone to dictate her life, so getting hold of her at times was close to impossible, but my grandmother liked it that way. "Granny," I said to her as tactfully as I could, trying to hide my burgeoning frustration as best as I could, "if you use a GPS, we'll find this place we're looking for so much quicker." "Nonsense, Scott," my grandmother said. She waved a veiny hand in my direction, almost as if swatting away an annoying fly. "I've been using maps all my life to get around the place," she said firmly, "and they've served me very well, thank you very much. I'm not about to change the way I do things. Nothing wrong with the old ways at all." "But, Granny, maybe if you—" My grandmother turned around to look at me square in the face, which made me recoil from saying anything further. "Look, Scott, I know you mean well, and your heart is in the right place. But let's just say I'm an old dog that doesn't appreciate new tricks. I don't expect you to understand that, because you're not from my generation. But I've been driving for many long years, you know, and I've found my way around the place with a map without any problems at all. And I don't want to change the habits of a lifetime Not now, anyway. It's too late for all that. But, Granny, if you were using a GPS, you'd have already found the old inn. I could see the sweat had gathered on my grandmother's brow. She looked increasingly flustered, although she was trying to mask it well, for she didn't want us to know that she was actually out of her depth. Without wishing to be unkind, my grandmother was a dreadful driver, and she was terrible at using a map, even though she vehemently believed otherwise. In truth, I wasn't surprised that we found ourselves on an ambiguous squiggle of sequestered roads. She was exactly like my mother in that regard, as when my mother lost her bearings, she'd all but go into a frenzied panic, and usually when me and my sister went on road trips with my mother, her GPS would seem to always go haywire, for no reason at all. My mother would practically hyperventilate. She'd become so anxious and stressed. I was always the one that had to get my mother, and now my grandmother, out of some tight scrapes. But I had to do it so subtly that they didn't even know I was doing it at all. And so I was wondering to myself how I could help my grandmother find this old inn, without her believing I'd helped her at all in this regard. On this occasion my 12-year-old sister Eugenie leapt to my grandmother's defence and told me to butt out and let our grandmother find this place on the map herself. "Granny doesn't use GPSs, Scott," she told me. "You need to respect that. Not everything has to be done the modern way, you know. It's good to learn how to use a map, because what happens if one day technology collapses? It's good to learn to do things both ways, so you have security, don't you think? So you don't get yourself in a bind when technology is no longer accessible to you." "Your sister makes a very good point, Scott. These days people rely on technology all the time to do everything for them. But what if it were to fail? It certainly wouldn't harm these people to do things the old-fashioned way from time to time," said my grandmother, "so that you can function normally, even if the power grid were to collapse." "I suppose so," I mumbled under my breath, knowing there was no arguing with two feisty females that were giving me a hard time. It was best just to grit my teeth together and say nothing at all, while hoping to God we found this place. On this road trip, I hasten to say, I did have my suspicions as to my grandmother's clandestine motives for coming here in the first place. I knew my grandmother loved old Victorian houses, but I also knew she wanted to go to a place where she might be witness to some paranormal activity. Of course, I'd read the article in the magazine that my grandmother had shown me. I admit I was intrigued by the story of the workman called Sam Forrester, who claimed to have seen the apparition of a woman from the 1800s wearing a Victorian dress. Given my grandmother's own friend, Mrs. Kitman, had stayed at the old inn with her grandchildren, and they had not experienced anything strange during their stay there, I was certain that after the old inn's alterations had been completed, the house had probably settled, and the paranormal activity gone away. I was certain my grandmother would not see a ghost on our trip, and I wasn't afraid to express my thoughts on this matter. In those days I was not desperately diplomatic, and was very direct and upfront with my grandmother, for nothing I ever said was filtered, which was something that annoyed my mother, who believed that sometimes my forthright candidness might come across as being extremely rude. I had always worn my heart on my sleeve, like my grandfather Falcon had done when he was alive, and I think my grandmother Gretchen respected that about me, and often claimed I was just like her late husband. "You want to see a ghost of the Victorian woman that worker saw when they renovated the property? Is that why we're going to stay at the old inn?" I asked my grandmother directly. At this my sister Eugenie stared at my grandmother incredulously, her mouth dropping wide open, so wide in fact she could have almost swallowed a fly. My sister Eugenie knew nothing about the article that my grandmother had shared with me. "Oh no!" she cried out in horror. "Please don't tell me this place we're going to is haunted, Granny. I don't want to stay in a haunted house. I don't want to see a ghost," she had wailed. "I'm scared of ghosts, Granny Gretchen." "Oh, don't you worry, sweetheart," said my grandmother sympathetically, looking at Eugenie through devoted eyes. "Even if you were to see a ghostly apparition, which is most unlikely, It could never harm you, you know. It would be like looking at a photograph that vanishes before your very eyes. If ghosts are real, they certainly don't impose a threat to the living. I can assure you of that. They can do nothing to harm us. But how do you know that, Granny? I've heard horrible ghost stories before, of people being pulled out of their beds by nasty apparitions. I've heard of people being scratched and punched and pinched. Look, sweetheart, nothing like that is going to happen to you, my grandmother assured my sister. My friend Mrs. Kitman stayed at the old inn with her grandchildren, didn't she? And nothing untoward happened to her. You'll be fine, I'm most sure. I don't care, my sister wailed. If we're staying at a haunted inn, I don't want to sleep on my own. I don't want to be in my own bedroom. I don't want to see a ghost. Well, that's settled then, dear. We'll share a bedroom together, so that you don't have to sleep on your own. But I'm quite sure you've got nothing to worry about at all. Why do you want to see a ghost? Eugenie brazenly asked my grandmother. Well, I read an article in that magazine, didn't I, all about the old inn. And even before your grandfather died, I was very fascinated and intrigued about the paranormal activity that was stirred up there. After your grandfather's passing, I thought about the article an awful lot, you know, because with your grandfather gone from this life, I miss him so dreadfully much. I thought to myself, if I went to stay somewhere that was reputed to have been haunted at some stage, where the apparition of a Victorian woman had been seen, well, if I were to see her myself, that would be confirmation to me that this life is not all there is, and that when we die, it's not completely over for us. But why does a ghost prove the afterlife even exists? My sister asked. Explain that to me, Granny. It's hard to explain, Eugenie dear. But for me personally, it would be confirmation that, we go on after this life. I believe energy goes on, you see, because energy can never die. Our physical bodies are one energy, our spiritual bodies another. I think in this life our bodies are rather like a cocoon, although we don't know it. Some people call it a meat suit, of course, that our spirit lives inside. And then when we leave that cocoon, we become like a butterfly. And we have what is known as a light body. That's what I believe. And it's identical to our physical body that we had in life, only a great deal younger and without any imperfections. Another reason I want to go to this beautiful Victorian property is to spend some quality time in a magnificent place with my grandchildren that has oodles of charm and character. An old manor house converted into an inn that is alive with history. It's just my cup of tea, Eugenie, and I'm certain it will be yours too. Mrs. Kitman took her 2 grandchildren there, and they loved every moment of their stay, to such an extent that they want to go back. And I'm quite sure you will feel much the same. But, Granny, I don't want to upset you by saying this, but what if you don't see anything paranormal at the Whispering Willows Inn? I asked her. I know Mrs. Kitman witnessed nothing strange with her grandchildren, so why should you? And just because you don't see a ghost, it doesn't mean they're not real, or that life after death doesn't exist either. Look, love, you make some very valid points. And just so you know, I don't mind if I don't see anything paranormal. I've certainly prepared myself for that. In fact, I'm quite sure I will not see anything. Let's just say in my long life, I have had many disappointments. So if I don't see anything paradoxical, it doesn't matter to me a jot. Life is a rich tapestry of moments, like the musical notes in a pretty song. I intend to enjoy every thread that goes into weaving our story. All I care about, Scott dear, is that with your parents away on that lovely cruise liner in the Mediterranean, that I make the most of this golden opportunity to spend quality time with my 2 favourite grandchildren. Your mother, of course, thinks that her trip on the Mediterranean, on this lavish cruise liner, is going to out-trump any fun that we all have together. But let me tell you this, Scott, that your mother is wrong, said my grandmother, looking at us both with a determined smile that lit up her piercing blue eyes. Yes, she is wrong, said my sister Eugenie triumphantly. We're going to have a much better time staying at the inn than my mother is on that cruise liner, aren't we, Granny? But of course we are. We're going to have a much better time than they are, said my grandmother. We're going to have so much fun, and I'm going to make sure of it. Little did we know that the time we spent at the Whistling Willows Inn would be an indelible, outlandish experience that we would never ever forget. So much so that looking back, I would often say, did that actually happen? But I assure you that it did. Indeed, our stay at the inn was to be so absolutely extraordinary that I would begin to realize that the fabric of our reality is even more complicated and complex than I ever imagined it could be. We had begun our wild adventure from our home in Washington, where we had taken a flight via Air North to Dawson City and hired a car from Klondike Car Rental, and now we were on this very lonely country road that could be anywhere when you're out in the sticks, that is. The previous evening we had stayed at the Midnight Sun in Dawson City and had asked people if they'd ever heard of the Whispering Willows Inn, and they looked at us with blank faces, shrugging their shoulders and saying nonchalantly, "We've never heard of it, but then again there are lots of bed and breakfasts in these parts." My grandmother didn't tell them that the Whispering Willows Inn was not a bed and breakfast, but more like an upmarket inn or guest house, as what was the point of that? I will admit I was extremely frustrated that my grandmother was refusing to use a GPS, but I knew one thing about her. I didn't want to rub her up the wrong way. She had her old-fashioned ways of doing things, and I needed to respect that. But I was getting as frustrated as she was, as we were taking a hell of a long time in finding the inn, and I was getting stiff and uncomfortable, seated in the same position for so long, and was absolutely dying to stretch my legs. All of a sudden I noticed a road going through the trees that seemed lit up by the light of the late afternoon sun, with a shimmering, golden-like glaze. The road seemed enveloped in a swirling rainbow of moving light, the likes of such I'd never seen before. It really was an anomaly. My grandmother even said, "How extraordinary! Look how that road is lit up! Look at all that rainbow light!" I remember being startled to see this road. I felt aggrieved with myself for failing to observe it before. How could I have missed it? I was rarely an observant person, so missing something like that was very unlikely for me. Even my sister Eugenie insisted the road had not been there before, and she seemed very convinced of this fact, which was comforting for me to hear, because I was chastising myself for missing it. "Don't be ridiculous, love," my grandmother said to my sister. "We overlooked the road, that's all. It'll probably be easy to miss, you know." I knew Eugenie was right. The road had not been there before. All I could think was that this was so incredibly strange. But then I persuaded myself that my grandmother had to be right. There was no other explanation, as there is no way a road appears from nowhere just like that. We really had to have overlooked it. But how had we done this? It seemed impossible to grasp. The road was prettily covered in a shower of autumn leaves that looked like golden confetti, which was extremely unusual, as autumn was a couple of months away. But then again, some trees are known to drop their leaves earlier than others. But on this road, every tree that fringed both sides of it boasted a resplendent plumage in golds, ambers, and reds. And even my grandmother admitted that she did find this profoundly odd. "Well, all I can say is there are pockets of coldness all over the country," she told us. "So my guess that this is an area where it gets colder than other parts, which is why the trees have been programmed to turn golden before their due time. But I'm not complaining about that. It's prepossessingly beautiful, and autumn is my quintessential, most favourite time of the year." As we drove down the road, with the shimmering sun casting its golden prisms over the leafy foliage, I found myself suddenly becoming rather chilly, as there was quite a dramatic drop in the temperature. It meant that I broke out in goosebumps all over my body, and I began to physically feel the cold, when moments before I had been rather warm. Suffice to say, I was very glad that my grandmother had encouraged both me and Eugenie to pack warm clothes for this trip, because you could never be sure how the weather might turn. My grandmother emphatically believed in preparing yourself for all seasons, no matter where you went in the world, for she had learnt about this from bitter experience. She had gone to Turkey once on holiday with my grandfather when he was alive. They had both arrived in the city of Istanbul, with suitcases packed to the brim with summer clothes, and had been forced as a consequence to buy warm clothing on their trip, for they had been ill prepared for the cold spell that had hit the country so prematurely, that had been accompanied by lots and lots of rain. My grandmother therefore believed it was always best to be prepared for every eventuality. I'm glad to say it was on this prepossessing beautiful road that I could see the distant silhouettes of the mountains caught under a shimmering mist. That was when we saw the sign for the Whispering Willows Inn, and I was the first one to shout out, "Granny, look over there! We found it! We found it! That's the sign for the Whispering Willows Inn!" My voice sounded unduly triumphant. I really was ecstatic, as we had arrived at our due destination, which would mean that I would be able to get out of this uncomfortable car and finally stretch my legs. My grandmother sighed with heartfelt relief. She made the sign of the cross in the air and smiled at us both warmly. She said, "Sometimes, children, I find God answers prayer far more efficiently than a GPS ever could." She stopped the car for a brief moment, and that was when I saw him. "Look over there, Granny! He's looking straight at us. Can you see him?" "Look where?" asked my grandmother. "Who's looking at us, Scott?" "It's a Bigfoot, Granny. He spoke to me. He asked me what we're doing here. I'm not joking, Granny. I'm being serious, deadly serious." "For goodness sake, Scott, listen to yourself. You do talk nonsense," said my grandmother, scolding me. "I know we've had a tiring, very exhausting, long-winded journey, Scott, and I blame myself for it because I should have found this place sooner. But I don't appreciate your making up practical jokes like this. I don't find it amusing, Scott, not in the least. Do I look like I'm laughing?" "But he was over there," I insisted. "It was a Bigfoot. I saw him. I know it was a Bigfoot. I'm not making it up, Granny. He spoke to me in my head. It was a telepathic exchange. It wasn't my imagination, Granny, I promise you." "Then where is it now, Scott?" asked my sister Eugenie, pulling a face. "You're pathetic, Scott, making up silly stories like this. There's nothing there, and you know it." "Your brother is teasing you, love," said my grandmother. "Scott is winding us both up. He knows there's no such thing as a Bigfoot. Don't you, Scott?" said my grandmother, looking directly at me, with a stern expression written over her face. I knew she wasn't amused that I'd claimed to have seen a Bigfoot, but I knew that even if I tried to persuade her of what I'd seen, she'd never ever believe me. At the time my nose had been pinned to the window, and I had been looking at a tree, thinking what was that thing standing next to it. As my vision came into better focus, I saw the distinctive pyramid-shaped head, the burly body, the ponderous shoulders, and then as I focused more intently on what I was observing, I realized to my astonishment that I was staring at a Bigfoot. I was so incredibly astounded that I thought I was seeing things for a moment, but that was when the Bigfoot looked at me, and that's when I heard the words in my head. "What are you doing here?" The Bigfoot had scratched his head, looking extremely bewildered, and that was the impression he'd left me with. 1 minute he was there, and then he was gone, but I knew I'd seen him. The surreal experience seemed to have lasted mere seconds, and after my grandmother's dismissive, almost condescending remarks, I began to doubt what I'd seen. If you saw a fairy flying past you in the yard, and it happened so very quickly, you begin to believe you have been mistaken about what you thought you'd seen. I could hear my sister mumbling under her breath that I was such a big liar, and so I knew that I would not discuss the matter any further. But the Bigfoot's words, "What are you doing here?" remained in my head and weighed heavily on my mind. What had he meant by those words? "Ah, here we are," said my grandmother. turning towards the grandiose wrought-iron gates that were closed. That was when a young man dressed in long dark pants with a waistcoat and a necktie, who was standing outside the gate, beckoned to us, as if he was expecting us. He looked like he'd stepped out of the pages of a history book, so seeing him dressed in such formal attire took me quite aback. When he saw us driving up to the gate in the rental car, his expression was somewhat bemused, as if he believed the car we were driving was somewhat strange. My grandmother rolled down the driver's side window and gestured for the young man, indicating she wanted a word with him. He came over to us with a broad smile on his face. He looked to be in his early 20s, and one of his front teeth was missing. My grandmother said, "We have a booking for a few days at the Whispering Willows Inn. I made a booking with the caretaker. It's me and my grandchildren." "Ah, that's right. You're the Barlow family, are you not? Miss Lewis says she's expecting you. You and your 2 grandchildren, that is." "Yes, that's right. These are my 2 grandchildren, Scott and Eugenie. But the name is Bradley. It's not Barlow." "Oh," said the young man, looking apologetic. "Please accept my sincerest apologies, and forgive me for getting it so badly wrong. I must have mixed up the name. But don't worry, Miss Lewis is expecting you. But we thought you were arriving here in a horse and carriage. This vehicle of yours is extremely unusual, madam. I've never seen anything like it before." And with that he opened the wrought-iron gates, and we drove down the driveway, leaving the young man standing behind the gates, looking at us with a somewhat confounded, rather incredulous expression upon his face. "What was that about, Granny?" I asked my grandmother. "Why did he call us Barlow? And what did he mean by saying he was expecting us to arrive in a horse and carriage? And what's so special about your rental car?" "I don't know the answers to that, dear," said my grandmother. "The young man did say some strange things, did he not? But I suspect it's easy to get confused over names. I expect so many people must stay here at the inn." "Maybe he was cracking a joke," said Eugenie. "About the horse and carriage, I mean. Because that's how people would have come to this house in the olden days, during the gold rush, wouldn't they?" "Oh, goodness gracious me, Eugenie, you're exactly right. At first your brother Scott teases us about seeing a Bigfoot, and then the young man at the gate teases us by saying he expected us to arrive in a horse and carriage, and I failed to see the humour of his joke. I guess I got so flustered in trying to find the place in the first place. So my humour has simply gone to seed. Never mind, we're here, so now all is well." "Granny, why's the man dressed so funny?" asked my sister Eugenie suddenly. "He's all smart and he's wearing a waistcoat and a tie. Don't you think it's a little over the top to dress so smart for the countryside?" "Well, we're staying at an old Victorian house, aren't we? Maybe the staff like to dress up in Victorian clothes. It's befitting for the theme of the house, I suspect. It's not totally unheard of for people to do that, you know." "That's so super cool," said Eugenie in delight, pressing her nose against the window. She was wearing an expression on her face of wondrous awe as my grandmother rolled down the driveway, and that was when we saw the Whispering Willows Inn for the very first time. I think all 3 of us gasped at once, for I have never beheld a more beautiful historic home in all of my life. It looked the kind of place where you would expect royalty to stay. It was typically a Victorian manor house, done in ornate, grandiose architecture, with those typical steeped roofs, decorative gables, large bay windows, turrets, towers, and wraparound porches. I noticed there were a couple of arched, attractive stained glass windows that immediately grabbed my attention because they were so magnificent and beautifully presented. The sizable 3-story house was impressive to behold, with an ornate facade that was incredibly elegant and stylish. The layout of the front yard was both formal but symmetrical at the same time, with stunning rockeries on display and beds of the most colourful flowers that I have ever beheld, that looked as if they were superbly maintained. If that wasn't enough, there was a walled kitchen garden where vegetables and herbs were grown. The 3-story mansion overlooked exquisite mountainous valleys, wood groves of tall lofty trees, and vibrant meadows of alpine flowers, and it rather reminded me of the Alaskan countryside in summer. "It's so beautiful, Granny Gretchen!" my sister Eugenie cried out in delight. Her enthusiasm was infectious, so much so that my grandmother smiled. She liked to see her grandchild looking so thrilled. My grandmother chuckled. "You're right, Eugenie. It is absolutely beautiful here. I will admit, in the magazine article I read about the Whistling Willows Inn, I thought it looked stunning, but in real life it exceeds my wildest expectations." It was when we arrived, another young gentleman, dressed much the same as the young man by the gate, gestured for us to park the car on the cobbled driveway, a little further away from the house. Much like the young man at the gate, he stared at our car with a rather befuddled expression on his face. Once my grandmother had parked the rental car and climbed out of the front seat, the young man helped her out of the car and gave her a polite bow. "Welcome to Whispering Willows Inn. We're delighted to have your custom, ma'am. You must be Mrs. Barlow, and these your 2 grandchildren. Miss Lewis is expecting you." "That's right," said my grandmother, "but I'm afraid you've got the name wrong. The name is Bradley, Gretchen Bradley, not Barlow. But I have made a booking for the next few days for me and my 2 grandchildren." "Oh, you must excuse me, Mrs. Bradley. I must have had my wires crossed. I was told your name was Barlow. Do you have any luggage with you?" "Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. In the trunk of the car. I'll show you if you like," said my grandmother, beckoning for the young man to follow her. She opened the trunk. The young man removed 3 of our suitcases from the trunk, placing them carefully on the ground. He left one behind him, carrying 2 suitcases in his hands. It was at that moment a very attractive young woman, wearing a shimmering emerald green dress with collapsed sleeves and a low neckline, came sashaying very elegantly towards us, with a big, warm, friendly smile on her face. I liked her almost immediately. There was something so spirited about her personality. The dress she was wearing was gorgeous, absolutely spectacular, like the dresses I've seen in old movies. This dress that she was wearing possessed a flattering V-shaped bodice and a full skirt that seemed to swish around as she moved, and I've never seen a woman's clothes do something like that before, so I was intrigued. The lady wore her black hair up away from her face. She had ringleted curls caressing both sides of her cheeks. Her pretty dark eyes expressed her extreme pleasure in meeting us. "Welcome! Welcome to the Whispering Willows Inn. Pray tell me, how was your journey here? Not too arduous, I hope. Believe me, I've heard some stories about how people struggle to find this place, but at least you're here, and that's all that counts. Well, we did get a little lost along the way," my grandmother admitted, "but we found it in the end. What a delightful place it is that you have here," said my grandmother. "Sorry, what is your name again? You're the caretaker of this place. Isn't your name Ella Jones? You work for Patrick Menenges. Isn't that right? I think you've done an incredible job in transforming this inn. It's quite remarkable. It looks so authentic. Oh, do please forgive me. Please mind my manners, will you? How frightfully rude of me not to introduce myself first. My name is Charlotte Lewis. I don't know who Ella Jones is, but I've never heard of her before. But yes, I run this inn for my uncle. I take care of everything. I'm delighted to meet you all. I understand you're looking to enjoy a few days of relaxation here with your grandchildren. You couldn't have come to a better place. Dawson City. Well, these days it's such a nightmare, is it not? All those horse-drawn carriages everywhere you go. Everyone wants to come to Dawson City these days. People only have one thing on their minds, and that is to get stinking rich as fast as they possibly can," she said, giggling. "I'm afraid lots of people struggle to find this place, but that's the whole idea. We don't want it to be too easily accessible. We like to be rather elusive, shall we say. Here at the Whispering Willows Inn, we welcome an exclusive clientele, people such as yourself. You are Mrs. Barlow, is that right? No, I think there's been some miscommunication here. The name is Bradley. We're definitely not Barlow, said my grandmother. Oh, dear me, Mrs. Bradley, it seems I owe you even more apologies. We've got so many people staying at the inn that it's easy to get names confused. And I apologize for that. Sydney over here will be kind enough to take you to your rooms, and then he'll bring your suitcases up in a moment. But he wants to show you to your rooms first. That's the protocol around here. I hope your stay with us, Mrs. Bradley, will be very agreeable. And if you need anything, you only need to ask. That's most kind of you, Miss Lewis, said my grandmother appreciatively. I have to tell you the truth. I am so impressed with this place. It's much better than I thought it would be. You've really helped me feel as if I've stepped back into another time. It's quite a surreal experience, let me tell you. At this idiosyncratic comment, Miss Lewis looked a little perplexed. Well, the 1800s is a good time to be alive, is it not? Well, you're welcome here, and I'm so glad that the inn meets with your approval. You're here to enjoy yourself, and that's the main thing, Mrs. Bradley. Anyway, just so that you know, dinner is served in the dining room at 7:30 sharp. Breakfast is between 8 and 10 p.m., and that's in the breakfast room. Luncheon is in the dining room, and it's served at 12:30, while tea is served at 4 p.m. in the breakfast room. Do you think you can remember all that? Of course I do, said my grandmother. For a moment Miss Lewis looked at the T-shirt and shorts that me and my sister were wearing, and couldn't hide the look of dismay on her face. She gave my sister a double look, as if she thought a young lady should not be wearing shorts in a glamorous inn such as this. I became conscious of the fact that I was very underdressed for this elaborate place, because all the staff, including the chambermaids I had seen bustling around the inn, were dressed in old-fashioned regalia. I did think it was profoundly odd, but I reasoned to myself that what my grandmother had said had to be true. I imagined the man who owned this place, Mr. Menenges, obviously wanted people to dress in Victorian clothes, so that when you stayed at a guest in his inn, it was like you felt as if you were going back in time, and so it really gave you a taste of Victorian life, and he had certainly made it feel very authentic. I had not expected the Whispering Willows Inn to be like this at all, and for the staff to dress in period costume was rather bewildering. But in its way it was also charming. But I did feel a little like a fish out of water, as if I'd travelled on a time machine straight back to the 1800s. Needless to say, the interiors of this gorgeous, very grand inn took my breath away. I felt as if I was stepping into a grand museum, because everything was pretty close to perfect. There were ornate, very grand fireplaces in every single room of this inn, high ceilings with decorated ceiling roses, and there was a large, sweeping, grand staircase, draped with an elegant, thick, luxurious carpet that led up to 2 upper floors. There was also a servants' quarters, I was told, which I never got to physically see. I could not help but notice the furniture in all the rooms was spectacular in every regard, obviously Victorian in style, made from traditionally dark woods, such as rosewood, mahogany, and walnut. Such furniture would cost a fortune today. All had been meticulously hand-carved, with roses, ivy leaves, bows, and ribbons. The walls were covered in stunning artwork, done in rich oils, of scenes depicting riders on horseback. There were paintings of flowers in vases, bowls of fruit, and a large collection of portraits of pompous-looking individuals wearing Victorian costume that seemed to stare down at me condescendingly from their portraits, making me feel as if they were looking down on me. If that wasn't enough grandeur for me to actually assimilate, there was also a plethora of gilded mirrors on the walls, along with some stunning tapestries. The floors throughout the Victorian property were all hardwood, and richly adorned with plush, highly decorative carpets. The entrance hall was tiled in black and white mosaic, which was very stylized. The place was sensational in every regard, and I felt the urge to rush upstairs and change into something much more respectable, so that I didn't feel quite so conspicuous and out of place. I think the men in the portraits would have appreciated that. I do not think that my grandmother had been remotely prepared for the inn to be so posh. So I was taken aback by all this, and not just a little overwhelmed. My only thought at that particular moment was, thank goodness I'd brought a smart shirt, a jacket and tie with me, as well as a pair of reasonably respectable trousers, which I would wear for dinner that evening. I was given a single bedroom all to myself, which pleased me greatly, along with a very elaborate, elegant gold key, the likes of such I'd never seen before. My grandmother had promised my sister Eugenie they would be sharing a room together, and she kept to her word. The bedrooms were luxuriously presented, exceedingly ornate, with fancy glass chandeliers that dangled from the ceilings, and gloriously heavily carved 4-poster beds, lined with opulent bed covers, done in rich reds, golds and greens. There was a walnut dresser in my bedroom, with a porcelain basin, a jug of cold water filled with rose petals. I think the thing that stunned me the most was the little room I discovered to the side of my bedroom that I had thought was a closet, and inside this room was a single toilet that literally just contained a chair with a china bowl attached to the bottom. I could also observe a Victorian bath and washstand, but there was no water pipes or plumbing anywhere to be seen, which I thought bizarrely strange. I wondered why the owner, Patrick Menenges, would go to such lengths to preserve the integrity of a Victorian home like this, that he wouldn't even bother to put any plumbing in the place to enhance the comfort of all his guests. As I was considering all this, there was a knock at my door, and I opened it, and there was a lady's maid standing there in the doorway, addressing me as Sir, which had never happened to me before, because I was only 14 years old. She asked me if I needed any hot water for my bathtub, and if I did, to let them know, and they would fill it up for me with buckets of hot water. I mean, it seemed nonsensical to me that in this day and age people would actually live like this. But I somehow managed to persuade myself that the owner of the Whispering Willows Inn, Mr. Patrick Menenges, must be an incredible eccentric who lived in the modern world, but probably wished he didn't. He was possibly one of those unorthodox individuals who loved all things Victorian, and even dressed as a Victorian gentleman himself. You often get people like that in this world. Is that why he'd gone to town to ensure that everyone in the inn wore Victorian clothes? "It is rather bizarre that this inn has no modern plumbing or electricity," my grandmother admitted to us, "but it certainly gives us a real taste of Victorian life. And maybe that's the idea of this place. I wonder why Mrs. Kitman, my friend Maple that is, never told me about all of this. It would have been nice if she'd warned me that the dress code was formal. By the way, I did see the way Miss Lewis looked at the both of you, wearing your shorts. She looked mortified by your appearance, and by what you were wearing, especially you, Eugenie. I don't think she approves of a girl wearing shorts and a T-shirt. I did feel rather embarrassed by it all. I do wish they'd given us a dress code warning before we came here. Honestly, if I had known this inn was so formal, I would have changed everything we packed. I hadn't anticipated this at all. Oh, by the way, I did ask Mrs. Lewis about the trampoline for you children to use. She didn't even know what a trampoline was. Can you believe that?" "But Mrs. Kitman told you there was a trampoline here," said my sister Eugenie, sounding bitterly disappointed. "Why doesn't Miss Lewis even know about it?" "Well, maybe there is a trampoline, love. But let's just say Mrs. Lewis doesn't seem to know anything about it. But then again, she's not the one that organises the outdoor activities for the guests here. She told me that Mr. Harper does all that. So we can find out tomorrow morning what activities we can engage in. And I'm sure then we can find out where the trampoline is." "I feel very underdressed here, Granny," I admitted. "Everybody dresses so smart here." "Well, at least we can be thankful for small mercies, Scott. You've got me to thank for insisting you brought your long pants along, as well as a dress tie and a nice crisp cotton shirt and jacket, because you can wear those for dinner tonight, and you, Eugenie, can wear a smart dress. I don't want Mrs. Lewis giving us any more funny looks. Honestly, Maple Kitman is the end. She should have warned us about this dress code. I know I keep going on about it, but I'm quite angry with the woman. Honestly, I am mad at her. I'll have some words with her when I see her next. Oh, we're expected downstairs for dinner at 7:30 sharp. Don't forget that. You heard what Miss Lewis said." When we went downstairs for dinner that evening, I noticed that there were only 3 other guests staying at the inn. They were all men that were very smartly attired, all sitting at their individual tables, being waited on diligently by the staff. I got the distinct impression they were men of significant means. "Oh, there you all are," said Miss Lewis, looking pleased to see us. "Oh, I am delighted to see you all." We entered the dining room, and she led us to a beautifully set table, and I truly felt like royalty, as if I was in a grand hotel, for the glasses glistened and the cutlery shone like a brand new pin. One of the waiters pulled out a starched linen napkin for us that he placed individually on our laps. We were served multiple courses one at a time, starting off with a clear consommé, followed by roasted meats and vegetables, and then a dessert of baked pears and a rich syrup, served with custard, and that was followed by a luxurious selection of rich cheeses, biscuits, and plenty of fruit. The food was absolutely delicious. I was more interested in what was going on around me, especially the very subtle, coquettish way that Miss Lewis was behaving towards one of the young men that I could see she genuinely liked. He was sitting at the table tucking into his roasted lamb, and she kept going up to him and saying, "How is the lamb, Mr. Pritchard?" "Very nice indeed. Thank you, Miss Lewis," he said, looking up at her with a warm, engaging smile. Miss Lewis practically melted like butter on a corn cob when the man looked at her through his warm eyes. He stroked his moustache reflectively and said, "That's why I keep coming here to the inn, Miss Lewis. The service and the food here is impeccable. I am never disappointed." "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Mr. Pritchard," said Miss Lewis. "We aim to please here at the Whistling Willows Inn." She hurriedly shuffled over to our table. Her face was flushed a bright pink. "Are you enjoying the roasted lamb?" she asked us. "Absolutely delicious," said my grandmother. "You can really taste the rosemary. The meat is very, very tender. Well, we have a very good chef here." Miss Lewis then leaned over the table and said in a muted whisper, "Tell me, is the man sitting on the opposite table to us, looking in this direction?" My grandmother chuckled. "You want him to look in this direction, don't you, Miss Lewis?" she asked her, with a naughty twinkle in her eye. Miss Lewis flushed, and then she looked at my grandmother soberly. "You do know who is sitting in that table? Well, it's Mr. Nelson Pritchard." "Never heard of him, love, I'm afraid," said my grandmother. "You've never heard of Nelson Pritchard?" said Miss Lewis, looking quite stunned. "But everybody knows him. He's the most eligible bachelor in these parts. He's stinking rich, and when I say stinking, I mean stinking." "Well, I'm not from this part of the world, Miss Lewis," my grandmother chuckled, "so I wouldn't know. But if you're wondering if the man fancies you, I'd say he certainly does. If you must know, he hasn't stopped looking in this direction since you walked over here. I think, in truth, he's quite mesmerized by you, Miss Lewis. In fact, I don't think he comes here for the good service you offer. I think he comes here for you alone." "You really think he likes me?" asked Miss Lewis. Her eyes lit up like 2 of the brightest stars you would ever find in the firmament, for indeed my grandmother could not have said anything that was more encouraging. Miss Lewis lowered her voice very cautiously. "Nelson Pritchard has made a ton of money on gold, you know. There isn't a girl in town that doesn't fancy the socks of him. But he's not like other men, you know. And that's why I find him so desperately attractive. It's not just because he's wealthy, although of course that's a huge asset. But it's his manner, you know. It intrigues me greatly. He mystifies me." "What exactly do you mean by that?" my grandmother asked. "Well, women throw themselves at Mr. Pritchard all the time. So brazenly, I have to say. And well, he brushes them away, doesn't he? Like the cat's hairs on a coat. I mean, he could have any girl in town he wants. And yet he's remained, what's the word I'm looking for? Very aloof, I think it is. Maybe he knows those women that are throwing themselves at him are after his money, my grandmother suggested. You're not interested in him solely, Miss Lewis, because of his wealth, are you? Because let me give you a word of advice, if I may. Women who choose to marry a man because of his great wealth, well, it doesn't lead to a happy outcome. You need to have a lot in common with the man you marry. And it wouldn't hurt if you are the best of friends first. I was best friends with my late husband, you know, Miss Lewis, and a day doesn't go past when I don't miss him dreadfully. You're a wise woman, Mrs. Bradley, and I'm very sorry for your dreadful loss. It sounds like your late husband was a man of noble character, and what you say makes perfect sense to me. But at the same time, it's incredibly important for me to marry a man of means. For if my parents were alive, they wouldn't expect less of me. Indeed, my father, if he was still around, would disown me if I were to marry someone beneath my station. Well, your father must have been a very unreasonable man, Miss Lewis, if you don't mind my saying so, said my grandmother. He should want you to be happy, over and above anything else, no matter who you marry. It's not for him to decide what you choose to do in your life and what decisions you make. That's your choice. It's your life after all, is it not, Miss Lewis? Oh, my father was a sweetheart, Mrs. Bradley. When he was alive, that is, of course. You have no idea. He'd have moved heaven and earth for me. But he'd never have wanted me to marry beneath my station. That just wouldn't be right as far as he was concerned. If the truth be told, I don't have any desire not to marry a man of means, but I also desperately want to marry a man of noble character, that makes me laugh, has a great sense of humour, and I really, really like Mr. Pritchard. Even if he wasn't wealthy, I think I wouldn't be able to keep my eyes off the man, but every girl in town likes him. So let's just say he hasn't been swayed by anyone's charms, not even Emma Madison. And Emma, well, she's the town stunner, if you know what I mean. She can have any man she wants, and if she could have Mr. Pritchard tomorrow, she would descend on him like a vulture on a meaty carcass. But for some reason, he keeps squatting her away, like a fly, and I honestly don't understand why. Well, maybe Mr. Pritchard has got lots of taste, said my grandmother. I mean, honestly, the woman you speak of sounds like a man-eater, and those are the very worst kind of woman a man would do well to avoid. You are hilariously funny, Mrs. Bradley. You have a fine sense of humour. A man-eater. I've never heard such a marvellous word being used before. But it's aptly applied to the likes of Emma Madison. She's a very beautiful woman, but she knows it. Her beauty has gone straight to her head. She has about as much personality as a dried-up fly on the living-room windowsill. Even my uncle thinks she's incredibly unlikable. Well, there you go, said my grandmother. If you like Mr. Pritchard, Miss Lewis, why don't you show him a little about how you feel? It wouldn't hurt to give the poor man a little encouragement. No man wants to chase after a woman who isn't just a little bit interested in him in the first place. That kind of chase is redundant. It'll leave him with mud on his face, feeling ever so foolish. Miss Lewis's face went absolutely white, and she said, But I can't do that, Mrs. Bradley. I couldn't just make overtures towards Mr. Pritchard. That would not be appropriate. I'm not a loose woman, Mrs. Bradley. But of course you're not, Miss Lewis. But you're a woman of great class and style. Anybody can see that. Supposing, Miss Lewis, Mr. Pritchard doesn't know you like him, in that special way, so to speak. It wouldn't hurt for you to let him know just very subtly that you like him. Because from what I overheard him saying when you were talking to him at the table over there, asking him how he was enjoying his meal, he was saying very eloquently that he comes here all the time. He says it's about the good service and the food. But I think although that may be true, he's really coming here for you, Miss Lewis. I can read his body language very well, and I know instinctively when a man likes a woman. It's not that hard to figure out, you know. What do you think, Eugenie? My grandmother said, turning around to look directly at my sister. Do you think I'm right about Mr. Pritchard? Does he like Miss Lewis? Eugenie smiled and nodded furiously. I think he really likes you, Miss Lewis. He keeps looking over here. I guess he's wondering what we're all talking about. But I saw the sparkle in his eyes, Miss Lewis. There's no mistake. My grandmother's right. He's got the hots for you. The hots for me, laughed Mrs. Lewis. What a strange expression. But I like it. At this point, Miss Lewis was blushing furiously. Even I nodded at Miss Lewis encouragingly, as I knew what my grandmother and Eugenie was saying was absolutely true. I could tell instinctively that Mr. Pritchard had a sizable crush on Miss Lewis, whom I was sure any man would consider extremely attractive. Well, Mrs. Bradley, I can see you're an expert in relationships, and you seem to know so much about the behaviour of men. So I would love some advice from you. You say I should make Mr. Pritchard know that I like him in a very subtle way. But how do I go about doing that? Without appearing, you know, well, too flirtatious, so to speak. My grandmother looked at Miss Lewis square in the face and considered her words. Why don't you say to him, Mr. Pritchard, I'm so delighted you're staying at the inn. It's so good to see you again. I'm going for a walk in the morning, and I was wondering if you'd like to accompany me. Something like that. Take some kind of initiative, if you know what I mean. You think if I say something like that he'll know I like him? Asked Miss Lewis cautiously. Absolutely, said my grandmother. If you want to know from my observations, I can see Mr. Pritchard is a shy, demure man, and men like him need bringing out of their shell. He's never going to take the initiative, Miss Lewis. Not his kind. He won't. If you want a relationship with him, well, the ball is entirely in your court. The ball is in my court. Goodness gracious me, Mrs. Bradley. I find the way you people talk absolutely hilarious, said Miss Lewis. That's the best advice I've heard in a long time, and I'm going to do it right now. Keep your fingers crossed that I succeed, and he accepts my offer. Good luck, dear, said my grandmother. We watched Mrs. Lewis saunter over to Mr. Pritchard's dinner table, which he did with a measure of mock confidence, I rather suspect, although I will admit her face was still extremely pink, and I was certain her heart was flapping wildly in her chest, because she so desperately wanted Mr. Pritchard to like her in a wildly romantic way. She was most definitely smitten by the man. Of that I was in no doubt, and I imagine she'd felt this way for a very long time. I think all of us gathered around the dinner table together that evening were rooting for Miss Lewis, hoping that everything would turn out well for her. I studied Mr. Pritchard curiously, and was struck by how handsome the man was. He was desperately old-fashioned, of course. He even wore a pocket watch, and was attired for a formal gathering. Everything about him was extremely distinguished, but my grandmother was absolutely right. There was no doubt in my mind he had a crush on Miss Lewis, because when she approached the dinner table, his face just lit up. So how was everything for you this evening, Mr. Pritchard? I hope it was up to your exemplary standards. I hope the cheese was satisfactory to you. One of the cheeses you were eating was a very rich cheddar, and it's my absolute favourite, I have to say. I'm very fond of cheese, Miss Lewis, and as you say, the cheddar was absolutely delicious. So you like cheese, do you, Miss Lewis? That's news to me. Oh, I'm very partial to a good cheese. I was wondering, Mr. Pritchard, I hope you don't think this is too forward of me, but I was wondering if before breakfast tomorrow morning that you'd possibly consider taking a walk with me in the wood grove. They always say a brisk walk before breakfast is rarely good for the health, and I would really appreciate the good company. I wish I could say that me, my grandmother, and my sister Eugenie were not eavesdropping on Mr. Pritchard and Miss Lewis, but we couldn't help ourselves. Our ears were wagging, and if we had tails like a dog, they would have been wagging too. Anyway, we could see a light going on in Mr. Pritchard's face, and he looked at Miss Lewis and said, "I'd like that very much, Miss Lewis. How very kind of you to think of me. I would be most delighted to accompany you tomorrow morning." Mr. Pritchard rose from the dinner table. He nodded at Miss Lewis and told her he'd see her in the morning. He walked out, and I noticed there was a definite skip in his step. "See," said my grandmother to Miss Lewis, "what did I tell you? Now Mr. Pritchard realizes that you're interested in him, as much as he is in you. Sometimes it doesn't do any harm to be a little forthcoming about your feelings. And now I think Mr. Pritchard knows he's got the green light to get to know you a whole lot better, Miss Lewis. Oh, I'm so glad, Mrs. Bradley, that you booked in to stay here at the Whistling Willows Inn. Although I got you down on my books as Mrs. Barlow for some reason. And believe it or not, I got another note from my footman that Mrs. Barlow and her grandchildren had cancelled their booking for this weekend because of a family emergency. So someone's been playing games with us, because here you are." "How very odd," my grandmother agreed. "I certainly didn't cancel our booking here, nor did I book under another name. Never mind, Mrs. Bradley. You and your grandchildren are here now, and that's all that counts. I just want to thank you, Mrs. Bradley, because thanks to you, Mr. Pritchard has agreed to go for a walk with me in the morning, before breakfast. I never expected he'd agree to this. It does mean, as you say, he must like me a little bit." "Of course he likes you, Miss Lewis," said my grandmother, "and not just a little bit. And why not? You're a very attractive woman, Miss Lewis." The following morning there was a rap on my bedroom door, an urgent rap, you could say. I hurriedly climbed out of my Victorian four-poster bed to see both my grandmother and sister standing in the doorway. They were both smartly attired, and looked to be extremely excited about something. "Hurry up, Scott, would you, dear?" said my grandmother. "Get dressed. We're going for a walk in the woods before breakfast." "We've just seen Mr. Pritchard and Miss Lewis going off into the woods," said my sister Eugenie excitedly. "We want to follow them, but we don't want them to know about it, of course." "You want to spy on them?" I asked, looking from my grandmother to my sister in disgust. "Well, we don't want to spy on them exactly, Scott," my grandmother assured me. "But we've got Miss Lewis's back, have we not? I mean, you can see what a stick in the mud Mr. Pritchard is. He's one of those desperately shy men that is too afraid to approach a woman, probably for fear of rejection, even though many women, from what I understand from Miss Lewis, have been throwing themselves at him for a very long time. I'm in no doubt he's extremely attracted to Miss Lewis. And what harm can it do just to enjoy a bit of exercise in the woods and watch from a distance to see how they're getting on? That's all. I think Miss Lewis will bring him out of his shell, and those two would make a fine pair. I've always fancied myself as a bit of a matchmaker," said my grandmother, with a twinkle in her eyes. "Now, are you coming with us, Scott, or do you disapprove of our interest in Miss Lewis's romantic life? From what I gather, she's been interested in Mr. Pritchard for many years, and the fact that he's kept coming back to the inn suggests that the interest that they have in each other is mutual. And I, for one, am a huge romantic." "All right, I'm coming," I said. "Give me 2 minutes. You go ahead of me, and I'll meet you downstairs." Moments later we made our way towards the woods. I turned around to my grandmother and said, "Something doesn't feel right about the Whistling Willows Inn, Granny. Something is really off, don't you think? Even Miss Lewis and the 3 men dining at the table last night, well, they didn't seem like regular folk. And what about the toilet facilities here? They're so unusual. I mean, they're literally prehistoric, don't you think? The fact that our baths are filled by the staff with buckets of hot water, it's all so incredibly weird." "What on earth do you mean by all that, Scott? Of course they're regular folk. And as for the bathing facilities, well, my guess is when you stay here, you're given a taste of what it's like to live in the 1800s. It's an authentic experience which makes things all the more special about staying here, don't you think? I really enjoyed having my bath last night, filled with buckets of hot water. And then they sprinkled rose water and essence of rose in the water. And what a wonderful experience it was. You don't understand what I'm saying, Granny. I'm saying that Miss Lewis and those 3 men dining at the dinner table last night, well, they were way too formal for our generation, don't you think? Even their mannerisms and the way they speak. Well, it's different to most people I know. They were wearing waistcoats and pocket watches, and even their moustaches were uniquely stylized. I've never seen men with such fancy moustaches before, apart from Hercule Poirot on Murder of the Orient Express, and he was a fictional character. I mean, these people are like characters from a history book, don't you think? Even last night, the way you were giving Miss Lewis advice. At first she appeared shocked at the mere suggestion that she should make any overtures towards Mr. Pritchard, as if the idea was quite vulgar to her. I mean, her obvious reluctance was so old-fashioned, don't you think?
Nonsense, Scott. You don't know what you're talking about, said my grandmother. There's nothing wrong with a woman waiting for a man to ask her out. She doesn't want to degrade herself by throwing herself at him. That's perfectly understandable, you know. In the case of Mr. Pritchard, well, you have to make the overture, because the man just wouldn't do it if it was given to him. He's obviously very reluctant in that regard. But in most cases, a woman does not want to be seen chasing a man, even in our generation. So I honestly don't know what you're talking about.
I'm not saying that, Granny. Don't you remember you explained that you thought Mr. Pritchard was extremely shy, and you thought he really liked her? Miss Lewis gathered up the courage to ask him to go for a walk with her that morning. Well, this morning, actually. She'd have never done that without your encouragement, Granny. Most women today, well, they don't behave like that. I think a lot of them would take the initiative in showing a man they liked them in some way. But Miss Lewis, well, she keeps her emotions tightly in check, buckled up, if you know what I mean. Almost as if she's wearing a straitjacket. Everything about this inn feels like we're living in another time, don't you think?
Oh, for goodness sake, Scott, listen to yourself. I think the idea of this inn is to feel that you've been taken off to the 1800s. It's an authentic experience. That's why you feel this way. I mean, the delicious food we were served up last night was so typical of Victorian times. And the way our baths were filled up with buckets of hot water and lots of rose petals was truly charming. I do agree with you that those old-fashioned toilets are something to be desired, rather prehistoric and dated. But that's part of the charm of this place, don't you think? As for Miss Lewis, she's a delightful woman with old-fashioned values, and she's to be commended for that. There's nothing wrong with keeping up your standards. You're reading too much into this, Scott.
But, Granny, I don't agree with you at all. Something's not right about this inn. When Miss Lewis said it would be beneath her station to go out with a man who was beneath her socially, well, do people even talk like that today? No, I don't think they do.
Miss Lewis is a delightful woman with a warm, engaging personality. She's got old-fashioned principles, and that is to be commended. Nothing wrong with that at all.
But, Granny, don't you see, something's not right about the Whistling Willows Inn? When Miss Lewis said it would be beneath her station to go out with a man who was not socially at her level, well, do people even talk like that today? No, I don't think they do.
Well, I think Miss Lewis is old-fashioned. There's nothing wrong with that, dear. Goodness gracious me. That's probably why Mr. Patrick Menenges employed her to work here at the inn, because she plays the part of a Victorian woman so incredibly well. She's in character to the tradition of this particular place. Look how old-fashioned I am, for example. I refuse to embrace technology. And you can't make sense of that, can you, Scott? Yesterday, I may remind you, you wanted me to use that damn GPS facility. But we found our way to the inn very happily without it, didn't we?
I agree with Scott, said Eugenie suddenly. Yesterday when you weren't looking, Granny, after you parked your rental car in the driveway, I saw that man who took our luggage into the house, running his hands down the rental car. He stared at it as if it was a piece of fine art. It was more than a little weird, Granny. And for your information, I've searched the grounds here this morning. There's no sign of a trampoline to be seen anywhere. You said Mrs. Kitman's grandchildren loved playing on the trampoline. But if that is the case, where is it?
Look, kids, I don't have the answers to all your questions. Right now I'm rooting for Miss Lewis and Mr. Pritchard. I'm hoping they're going to get together, so we better catch up with them to see how they're getting on. Don't you think?
I think it's prying, Granny, I said. Isn't Miss Lewis entitled to her privacy? It seems wrong to be spying on her.
Who's being old-fashioned now? My grandmother teased. Come along, Scott. Don't be so churlish.
The woodgrove was utterly magnificent as we sauntered eagerly down the country path through the trees, the cool breeze nuzzling our cheeks. Everything was littered with the evidence of autumn, which was another anomaly for me, as by rights it was 2 months before it was officially autumn. But since we had arrived at the Whistling Willows Inn, the weather had been significantly cooler, and everywhere you looked, the tall, lofty trees were covered in stunning displays of red and gold foliage. The footpaths through the trees had been cleared, so that even horse riders could take full advantage of trotting down the country tracks, and one man on horseback did just that, giving us a nod. I recognized him at once as the man at the dinner table from the previous night.
"Good morning, folk," he said to us. "I hope you're enjoying your morning stroll. The weather is quite fresh today. Mind you keep warm. I'm sure I'll see you back at the house for breakfast later. Enjoy your ride," my grandmother said, and he nodded and trotted away.
"Hear that?" said my grandmother excitedly, when we heard the familiar tinkle of a woman's laughter. "That's Miss Lewis." My grandmother hurriedly indicated for us to follow her as we moved towards the sounds. We piled behind each other, one by one, to hide rather cautiously behind a very substantial tree, with a significant-sized trunk. We could see Miss Lewis on the footpath. She was walking next to Mr. Pritchard, and her face was flushed bright pink. And suddenly they stopped walking, as Mr. Pritchard cleared his throat.
"I just want to say, Miss Lewis, that I'm extremely thankful that you invited me for this lovely morning walk. It's a privilege to have a walk with you, and on such a beautiful morning as this. I'm very blessed to be in your good company. I'm a rather reticent man, Miss Lewis, as you probably realize. I'm afraid I don't exactly wear my heart on my sleeve. But I have been coming to this inn for an awfully long time, and it hasn't just been for the food or the lovely scenery, although that is, of course, very significant. But I've been coming here, Miss Lewis, because of you. I like you very much indeed, Miss Lewis, and I've surprised myself this morning by being so forthright and upfront with you. It is most unlike me to be like this."
My grandmother, the perennial romantic, was looking elated as we listened to the conversation. She was putting her thumbs up. I could see she was over the moon to be hearing Mr. Pritchard, becoming so sincere in expressing his true feelings towards Miss Lewis. And even though I knew our eavesdropping was wrong, I was exceedingly pleased to hear Mr. Pritchard confessing the way he felt about Miss Lewis. It would seem their mutual appreciation over each other was long overdue.
"Look, Miss Lewis, as we're being completely honest with each other, I might as well put all my cards on the table and show you my hand. I do understand that your father and mother are both deceased, and I'm very sorry about that. I wanted to ask your good father for your hand in marriage, but I was shocked to learn he was no longer around."
"You wanted to ask my father for my hand in marriage, Mr. Pritchard? You do surprise me."
"Yes, I did. So instead of speaking to your father since he wasn't around, I spoke to your uncle, your father's brother, Mr. Rowlings Lewis, whom I understand is your guardian. He's the one that owns the Whistling Willows Inn, and I understand you have helped him run this place for a long time. I spoke to him 2 years ago, if you must know, in regards to you. Yes, I admit it. I've liked you for a long time, Miss Lewis. I've never met anyone like your uncle before. What an eccentric gentleman he is. I asked him if I might have your hand in marriage, and he said I needed to ask you. But as far as he was concerned, as your guardian, he felt I would be a suitable suitor for you, and that your father, your late father, would have approved of me. So he was quite happy. I had no idea all this was going on behind my back, Mr. Pritchard. I don't know what to say. My uncle never mentioned any of this to me. Well, he wouldn't have done so, Miss Lewis. He said I was welcome to ask you any time I liked, and frankly I just couldn't find the opportunity to do it. Every time I've come here with that purpose, I've completely lost my nerve. I was worried that you might not feel the same way about me. But this invitation for a walk with you this morning has made me think that maybe you might like me, just a little bit perhaps. Oh, Mr. Pritchard, you are a funny man. You don't have a high opinion of yourself, do you? You don't even seem to be aware of your own desirability. You think my uncle's eccentric, but you are not unsimilar yourself. You're cut from the same cloth, I can tell. I like you, Mr. Pritchard. You're not like the other men I've met. But why you should like me, well, in truth, I don't understand this. From what I've gathered, there are women everywhere in town, throwing themselves at you. Everyone knows that you got very wealthy from all the gold you acquired, so you can have your pick of women. I wasn't interested in any of those women that threw themselves at me, said Mr. Pritchard. It was only you, Miss Lewis. When I laid eyes on you, I felt as if I'd been struck by lightning. Goodness gracious me, Mr. Pritchard, you're making me grow quite red. I don't know what to say. But what about Emma Madison? Every man in town would like her on his arms. And from what I'm given to understand, she has an eagle eye on you. For a very long time, I believe, Mr. Pritchard. You could flick your little finger at her, and you would have her on your arm faster than you can say Queen Victoria. Let's just say, Mr. Pritchard, Emma Madison would be absolutely appalled if she thought your interest was in me and not in her. She keeps going on about the great wealth you have acquired of late. Why does that not surprise me? The woman is grotesquely vulgar, as poisonous as a tree frog. I've known since she started sniffing around me, like a dog on heat, that she's only interested in me because she heard of my huge gold find. There are some foolish men out there that are blind to such things, but I am luckily not one of them. I would never want to court a woman who only had an eye on my pocketbook. Apart from anything else, that awful woman knows no bounds when it comes to employing her vanity to use against men like a deadly weapon, and those who sadly get ensnared in her insidious honey trap have my deepest sympathy. That woman is no more than a black widow spider. Do you know how ugly vanity is, Miss Lewis? It's very unattractive to see in a woman, especially to a man such as myself. I appreciate a woman who doesn't even know she's beautiful, and I prefer a woman of substance and noble character, for beauty is not just skin deep. It comes from within, and you can see it in the eyes of a woman, for the eyes are the windows of the soul. You, Miss Lewis, are the epitome of true beauty. Beauty on the inside and on the out, if I may be so bold as to say. You embody the rare kind of beauty that is almost impossible to find, and that most men wish to find but often don't know how or where to find it. I know exactly where to look for gold, Miss Lewis, which is why I've been successful, and I've found a substantial amount of it. And I also know where to look for the heart of a good woman, and that is the best kind of gold you can ever acquire. When I first laid eyes on you, Miss Lewis, well, let's just say, without wishing to scare you away, I was very enchanted and beguiled by you. I felt it was divine providence, from the good Lord himself, that I should find myself staying at the Whistling Willows Inn, to be greeted by someone such as yourself. When I saw you for the first time, I knew I was a lucky man indeed. And when you find gold, you keep your eye on that treasure, lest anyone might steal it away from you. And that was my biggest fear in your regard, Miss Lewis, that some other noble man might win your heart."
"Goodness gracious me, Mr. Pritchard! I never imagined for a moment you felt this way about me. I'm extremely flattered."
"I didn't say any of this to flatter you, Miss Lewis. I speak from the heart. When it comes to Emma Madison, Miss Lewis, I find it completely impossible to comprehend why you would compare yourself with such a brash woman and do yourself such an injustice. Her eyes are as dead as a dodo. There is no soul in her, no hint of compassion, no embodiment of charm. She is like an empty shell that looks significantly good on the outside, but hasn't got very much going on the inside. If I were to spend even an hour of my valuable time in her frivolous company, I fear I would become exceedingly bored. But on this walk with you, Miss Lewis, I feel as if I'm alive, and I haven't felt like this in an awfully long time, let me tell you."
"Well, Mr. Pritchard, I don't know what to say. I am completely lost for words."
"Do you mind me being so bold, Miss Lewis, as to ask you if my feelings towards you are reciprocated? For you mentioned you liked me, and if your feelings towards me are romantically inclined, it would certainly make me a very happy man."
"I don't know if you remember the old lady and her 2 grandchildren sitting at the table opposite you last night during the evening meal, Mr. Pritchard. Did you happen to notice them at all?"
"Yes, I did. You were speaking to that old woman for quite some time, were you not? I noticed all 3 of them seemed a little underdressed for dinner, but they seemed like rather good people to me."
"Well, that older woman, she's a woman of substance and great wisdom. She confided in me that she thought you liked me."
"She did?" asked Mr. Pritchard, sounding somewhat surprised. "I had no idea I gave myself away. I've never considered myself to be an open book."
"Well, Mr. Pritchard, you underestimated how shrewd that old woman was, because you obviously did give yourself away to her," said Miss Lewis, chuckling. "Anyway, I was told that if I liked you, I should do something to let you know, which was why I invited you for this morning walk. It was the old lady's idea. So to answer your question, Mr. Pritchard, I like you very much indeed, as we're being very open with each other. And I've done so since the very moment you arrived at the inn. But I never thought you would be interested in me."
"Good Lord! Had I known any of this, I would have moved mountains a long time ago, Miss Lewis. If that is indeed the case, then I need to do this right now, as there is no time to waste, for I fear you might just slip away. I feel as if I'm caught up in a dream, of which I might just wake up and realize isn't true after all."
"This is no dream, Mr. Pritchard. I mean exactly what I say." Then it happened quite unexpectedly. Mr. Pritchard got onto his knees on the forest floor and looked up adoringly into Miss Lewis's dark, soulful eyes, and then he took her hand and kissed it.
"Miss Lewis, I have your uncle's blessing, so will you do me the honour of accepting my hand in marriage? Please do not refuse me, for without you on my arm, I would become like a lonely old man. You are the one for me, and I have always known this, Miss Lewis. My feelings towards you are on fire. There is no other way to describe them to you."
"Goodness gracious me, Mr. Pritchard! I never expected such a romantic profession on this casual morning walk. But yes, I would gladly accept your proposal of marriage. Very gladly."
Mr. Pritchard looked into Miss Lewis's eyes adoringly. "You make me a very happy man, Miss Lewis. Very happy indeed." The next thing the 2 of them were embracing, and it felt wrong to be intruding on their special moment. My grandmother suddenly put a hand on my shoulder and whispered,
"We were not supposed to eavesdrop on this. I wanted to see if they were getting along together.
But never did I imagine for a second the man would just pop the question like this. Goodness gracious me! I didn't envisage this in a million months of Sundays. I mean, they barely know each other all that well. They might have seen each other for years, but they were very, very, distant from each other. And now Miss Lewis accepted Mr. Pritchard's marriage proposal just like that. She must really like him an awful lot. Of course, I'm extremely happy for her. But I am very surprised that this happened so fast. Mr. Pritchard didn't waste any time in asking her to marry him. Even I didn't just marry your grandfather until I got to know him a whole lot better. But by the looks of what I've seen here this morning, those two will be marching down the aisle in days, let alone weeks. I considered my grandmother's words carefully, and once we'd walked away from Miss Lewis and Mr. Pritchard, I told my grandmother exactly how weird I thought everything was about the Whistling Willows Inn and the people staying there. I kept trying to tell you, Granny, ever since we came to the Whistling Willows Inn. Everything seems so off. Everybody acts and behaves as if they're from another time. In the olden days, people would propose like this, without really knowing someone terribly well. Even in relationships today, people are carefree and more casual. People will often live with each other for months and even years before they decide to get married. Sometimes they even have children before they tie the knot. The way Mr. Pritchard proposed to Miss Lewis, it was so formal. It was like out of one of those movies, you see, those very old movies, don't you think? All of a sudden, as I was talking to my grandmother, she was not listening to what I was saying. She seemed distracted by something over my shoulders. Her blue eyes grew enormous. She looked somewhat alarmed, and she said, "Oh, my God! Oh, my God!" Then all of a sudden she collapsed and fainted, landing on the forest floor in a crumpled heap. For a moment I thought my grandmother was dead, and I began to decidedly panic. "Granny, are you all right?" I cried out in urgent dismay, dropping to the ground by her side to check her pulse. My sister Eugenie was crouching by my grandmother and tapping at my grandmother's cheeks furiously, slapping them quite hard. "Wake up, Granny!" she cried out in alarm. "Please wake up, Granny! Wake up!" My grandmother failed to respond, but I was relieved to see that she was breathing. So she wasn't dead, but something had rattled her cage so much so that she had passed out from the shock. I'd never known my grandmother to do that before, but I have heard of people fainting from shock. My sister was looking at me in surprise. "Why did Granny faint?" she asked me. "She looked so scared, don't you think?" In that moment I remembered that Granny had seemed affrighted by something she was looking at behind me. So in that moment my sister and I instinctively turned around to look at what it was that had scared my grandmother, half to death it would seem. And that was when I saw him. It was a big strapping male Bigfoot. He was standing by a tall lofty tree, looking at us through his dark, intelligent eyes. It was clear to us that he wasn't going anywhere. He stood there larger than life, imposing and majestic, while we stared at him in a state of complete bewilderment. I knew at once that this was the very same male Bigfoot that I had seen while we were in the rental car, looking for the whereabouts of the Whistling Willows Inn. And now I was seeing him up close and personal. I knew I'd never imagined him. He had spoken to me when I was in the car, asking me what I was doing here, and now we were crossing paths again. But I had a profound sense that our meeting was not random, by any manner of means, that it had been purposely orchestrated by the Bigfoot himself, as if our rendezvous in the woods was not just a chance encounter. My grandmother was still out for the count, it would seem, but we were paying no attention to her. Instead, we focused on this huge, lofty creature standing before us, who had perforated our reality like the most unlikely surprise that we had never seen coming. We were trying to discern whether this encounter was a good or bad thing, depending, of course, on how the Bigfoot reacted towards us, but by all accounts, he appeared to be benevolent. Despite the creature's lack of antagonism towards us, Eugenie looked terrified by him. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. I think if she could have run back to the Whispering Willows Inn,
She'd have done just that in a heartbeat, without even daring to look back. But although she was trembling like a tree in a heavy windstorm, she was too incapacitated by her fear to move. I was not afraid per se, but more intrigued and fascinated by this Herculean-sized creature, and I guess my anxiety was somewhat diluted, for the Bigfoot had previously spoken to me, so I knew he was highly intelligent, but seeing him face to face like this was more than a little intimidating. Ostensibly, the Bigfoot's majestic presence demanded great respect, almost as if he had some kind of divine authority. He was strappingly built, with a distinctive head shape of a silverback gorilla, only so much bigger. His face was uncannily human, but exceedingly expressive at the very same time. His forehead was heavily wrinkled, and his skin colour was a deep charcoal. I noticed his deep-set hooded eyes were dark and spirited, his shoulders ponderous. Beyond that he had overlong arms, and was powerfully built, so that even his thick legs rather reminded me of sizable tree trunks. He had the sturdiness of a rhino. My grandmother was still out cold when the Bigfoot spoke to us, but I barely noticed her, I'm ashamed to say. When he spoke, his words were expressed in an ancient, unfamiliar language that was incongruously immediately translated in my mind into English.
Ham fatila, sakilatani, ha kolapitana, wasalito. What are you doing here?
He asked us.
Golatina paki. Why are you in the wrong time? Hilatina sokwana. How did you get through the portal? Hantila sikani. I was watching over it. Kani kalona ba hasikwan. I never saw you getting into the portal, for had I done so, I would have scared you away. You don't belong here.
Sorry, I said. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Hantila kikwa, sashikansi. You're not from this time, the Bigfoot explained. Halitola kisa, ham fan sinaquina, likasinto. How did you get through the portal? That's what I want to know. I spoke to you the other day, if you remember, when you were in the car. I asked you what you were doing here. Kasikashwana, likasinako. I am the keeper of the portal. Kilatilasa, hoshankaswa. I don't understand how you slipped through the portal without being seen. I didn't see you, but you don't belong here. But I'm sure you've discerned that already. You must know that you do not belong to this time. Hisakwasi, hashakasana.
Sorry, I said again, looking at the Bigfoot incredulously, as if none of his words made any sense at all. I don't know what you mean exactly.
Kasikwa. You can't stay here, said the Bigfoot, shaking his head adamantly. Indeed, to correct this blunder now, you need to come with me at once, so that I can open the portal for you and guide you back to where you belong. I blame myself for this. I was clearly not paying close enough attention to the portal. I've been watching the portal for years, and no one has ever slipped through it without my say-so.
The Bigfoot began to examine my grandmother, and bent down on his haunches, as she still had not woken up from her fainting spell. All of a sudden my grandmother was beginning to stir, but when she observed the Bigfoot standing over her, she nearly passed out all over again. The Bigfoot spoke to my grandmother in a gentle, reassuring, rather soothing tone of voice.
Kantikwasi, ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not the monster you believe I am, although I dare say you've heard stories of my kind before. Like you, there are some of my kind who are not good, and others that are, for there is good and evil in this world in everything, and I'm on the side of the light. You have nothing to fear in my company. I am the keeper of the portal in these woods. You are caught up in the wrong time. I need to take you through the portal to correct this mistake, or you will be lost here indefinitely. for some of your kind have been lost to their worlds through mistakes such as this, never to be seen again. I wouldn't be doing my job correctly if I didn't rectify this. All will be well, I assure you, if you follow me."
My grandmother got to her feet, shaking rather awkwardly, and the first thing she said, as she wiped her eyes, is,
"Am I dreaming? Because if I am, please wake me up." "Are you really real?" she asked the Bigfoot. "Or am I hallucinating? I'm sure I'm hallucinating. Have I bumped my head or something?" "Ma'am, kontola kiswana, lisan tolo." "You're not dreaming," the Bigfoot told my grandmother. "I know your kind do not know much about my people, but we watch over the portals in this world, and we travel between different realities and dimensions. My name is Solitaire. I'm the keeper of this portal. You are caught up in the wrong time. I need to take you through the portal back to your correct time. You don't want to be stuck here. Believe me, you don't." "Sorry, what are you talking about exactly?" said my grandmother. "I don't understand. I feel rather confused." "Are you really real?" she asked the Bigfoot again. "This is not a dream, is it? I'm sure it must be a dream." The male Bigfoot was very patient with my grandmother, and at this point in time my sister Eugenie, who at first had been so affrighted by the Bigfoot, had now become quite intrigued, and she said to my grandmother, "Granny, this isn't a dream, I promise you. Look, I'm real, and so is Scott. And this is Solitaire. He's a Bigfoot. He's trying to help us, Granny. He says we're stuck in the wrong time. We need to go with him. I think he knows what he's talking about, Granny. Did I not say everything was off at the Whispering Willows Inn? I think we've genuinely been stuck in the 1800s. I think Solitaire knows how to take us back to our time." "But are you sure about this?" asked my grandmother. "This is all beyond me. How could this even happen to us?" The Bigfoot nodded. "You are caught up in the wrong time, ma'am. There is no time for us to lose. I need to get you back to your time at once. If I don't, I will not rest with myself comfortably." I remember we all followed the Bigfoot in an extreme sense of amusement, wondering what this all could possibly mean. But we knew the Bigfoot knew what he was talking about, and we knew instinctively that we could trust him. There was something so regal about him that made us look up to him like you would a commander in the army, who has the authority and the know-how of how to evacuate you from a dangerous war zone and bring you back to safety, alive and well. I think as the Bigfoot had mentioned we were in the wrong time. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit. Everything at the Whispering Willows Inn had been off, with the people wearing Victorian dress and their idiosyncratic old-fashioned behaviours that had left me wondering why people talked in such a way, including the way Mr. Pritchard had got down on his knees in the woodgrove to propose to Miss Lewis. Then there was, of course, the strange toilets and the lack of plumbing and electricity, along with the peculiar way the male servants had looked at my grandmother's rental car, as if it was a UFO that had landed from outer space. I think I realized now that we had slipped through a portal and gone back in time, and the Bigfoot was taking us back through the portal to our current time. As we walked through the grove, the Bigfoot beckoned for us to stop, and so we did so obediently. We had come across a tree where there were all these strange carvings done on the wood that looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. I knew they meant something, but what they meant I couldn't be sure. The Bigfoot then chanted some strange words, and then we heard this whooshing sound and saw a swirling mist appear before our eyes, just like magic. The mist was so dense and foggy we couldn't see anything through it, and then it suddenly dissolved, and there we saw a path ahead of us, covered in a gold gleaming light, and there were rainbows of colour glistening around the path, like the circles you see in a tree trunk, once it's been cut, of course. It felt as if we were walking through an arched tunnel of swirling light that moved around us in rainbow colours. Then finally, as we walked down the path, we came to the original road we had been on when we were looking for the Whistling Willows Inn. Solitaire led us back to our car. "Kilati kwa sana, shaki sono." "I've taken you back to the time you were on this road looking for the inn," he informed us. He pointed to a road leading off the original road we were on. Katilakwasa. That is a road that leads to the inn in your time. Kilasikwana. I need to go. Kansakwishana. I wish you well. And with that Solitaire walked away and vanished from our sight, before we even had a chance to thank him for helping us. What on earth is all of this about? All this stuff about time and portals, and then we meet a Bigfoot. I just can't make any sense of this. I feel as if my head is in an absolute spin. My grandmother sashayed over to the trunk of our rental car, and that was when I realized to my astonishment we were wearing the same clothes we had been wearing the day before, when we were looking for the inn. How could our clothes mysteriously have changed like this? My grandmother opened the trunk, and she stared at our suitcases in disbelief. Our suitcases are all here! We then just climbed into the rental car and proceeded down the road, towards the wrought iron gates of the Whistling Willows Inn. There was no one at the gate, ready to open it for us. Instead, there was a modernized intercom system, so my grandmother pressed the button, and the voice on the other side said, "Hello! Is that you, Mrs. Bradley?" "That's right, it's Mrs. Bradley," said my grandmother. "I'm here at the inn with my 2 grandchildren. You're right on time, Mrs. Bradley. Welcome to the Whistling Willows Inn." And with that the gate of the inn opened automatically, and we drove down the familiar long driveway, and noticed to our amazement that none of the tall lofty trees were wearing gold and red plumage on their leaves, as it was clearly not autumn here. By contrast, everything was so green. When my grandmother parked her car outside the Whistling Willows Inn, on the stunning red brick driveway that had not been there before when we'd first arrived, we now understood we really must have been caught in some kind of time slip, for although the inn looked Victorian, there were modern influences everywhere to be seen. There were terracotta pots decorating the front inn, filled with hanging geraniums and purple lobelia. The inn was no longer the same as it had been moments before. Everything was astonishingly different. And there was no kitchen garden, nor were there big beds of exquisite flowers, nor did I see a rockery of any kind. Instead, everything on the outside was considerably different, although I must confess the grounds were extremely well presented, with superbly mown green grass and perfectly landscaped beds of white roses. It was not quite as charming as it had been moments before. It was surreal to come back to a place that had changed so dramatically in a matter of what seemed like seconds. The inn door flew wide open, and a woman wearing a pair of white cotton pants and a blue top, with red beads around her neck, came dashing towards us. She was in her early 40s, and looked nothing like Miss Lewis. Everything about her was extremely modern. Ella Jones shook my grandmother's hand very warmly. She acknowledged both me and my sister Eugenie with a friendly nod. "Welcome, Mrs. Bradley, to the Whistling Willows Inn. And welcome, I believe it is, Eugenie and Scott. We hope you all have a great time here. Just so you know, I manage the affairs of the inn for Mr. Menenges, who owns the place. I oversee the needs of all our guests that stay here. So if you need anything at all, you only have to ask. You probably know that during the gold rush years, this was a thriving inn for a very elite, posh clientele, I have to say. The inn was originally owned by the Lewis family. The place was run by a young woman at the time called Charlotte Lewis. Charlotte Lewis was the caretaker of the inn. She took charge of the place on behalf of her uncle Rollings Lewis, and she later inherited the inn from him. Miss Charlotte Lewis married a very wealthy man who made an absolute fortune from the gold rush. His name was Mr. Pritchard, I believe it was. Charlotte Lewis could have had anything in the world she wanted, because through marriage she had acquired an enormous amount of wealth. But the inn was a passion for her. So she and her husband, Mr. Pritchard, happily ran the place together for many long years. They had 3 boys, I believe it was. The inn remained in the Pritchard family for many years, and my boss, Patrick Menenges, purchased the place from a man called Leonard Pritchard. The place was restored to its former glory, as you can see, with much blood, sweat and tears, I hasten to say. Many people thought the old inn just was not worth saving. But Patrick Menenges overcame all obstacles and refused to listen to all the naysayers. And now here the inn is today, and it is a devotion of love, it surely is. I hope this inn, this old inn, will give you a feel of Victorian life, just like it was in the days of the gold rush in the 1800s. We've tried our best to keep the integrity of the inn. But of course we have modern conveniences like television and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. We also have wonderful activities for you to enjoy doing here with your grandchildren, Mrs. Bradley. And believe it or not, we have a trampoline on the grounds that is very popular with children, and I'm sure your grandchildren will be no exception on this.
You have a trampoline on the grounds? Asked Eugenie, her eyes twinkling happily. You didn't have a trampoline in the 1800s, did you? They didn't even know what a trampoline was back then.
I suppose they didn't, Ella Jones admitted. There are many activities you can enjoy during your stay here, as I was saying, from horse riding to fishing, and the list goes on.
I know all about that, my grandmother said.
Mrs. Kitman brought her grandchildren to stay here. They had a wonderful time on that trampoline of yours. Oh, yes, I do remember Mrs. Kitman. A delightful woman, and so were her grandchildren. They thoroughly enjoyed their stay with us.
Do you have any ghosts haunting the inn? Mrs. Jones, my sister, inquired.
What a strange thing for you to ask, said Ella Jones. There was paranormal activity here, according to my boss, Patrick Menenges, when the builders were renovating this site. One claimed, well, one of the workmen, that is, to have seen the ghost of Charlotte Lewis herself. You'll see a picture of her and her husband, Mr. Pritchard, in the entrance hall. But beyond that, no, there's been no sightings of ghosts here. Why? Are you interested in ghosts or something?
Well, not really, but I don't mind if Mrs. Lewis haunts the inn. I'm not scared of her. I would be scared of other ghosts. But Miss Lewis, well, she's so nice, said my sister. I'm so very glad she chose to marry Mr. Pritchard, because he liked her for an awfully long time, you know.
Well, I had no idea you knew so much about the history of the house, said Ella Jones, looking somewhat taken aback. Well, we read a magazine article about the history of the place, said my grandmother politely. It really does look magnificent. Your boss, Patrick Menenges, did an outstanding job. I noticed my grandmother's voice lacked enthusiasm, because we knew perfectly well that as lovely as the Whistling Willows Inn was, there was no doubt, of course, that Mr. Menenges had excelled himself in bringing the old inn back to life, but it certainly didn't look as fabulous as it had done so in the 1800s. It was in that quintessential moment I realized how extraordinary it was that we had lived a day in the life of another time, not fully realizing it until now. I was already missing Miss Lewis and the rather unusual clientele, but I realized from what Mrs. Jones had told us that Miss Lewis had gone on to marry Mr. Pritchard, and the Whistling Willows Inn had remained in the family line for a long time. While it was an enjoyable experience staying at the Whistling Willows Inn for the next few days and jumping on that trampoline, I really did miss our time in the 1800s, and I will never forget the Bigfoot, Solitaire, who brought us through that portal. And even today, I will say to my sister Eugenie, "Did that actually happen?" And she is always quick to remind me that yes, it did. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.